Patchy rain and drizzle coming into the far northwest by the end of the night. Elsewhere across the UK, clouds clear through the nights and temperatures fall. Single figures for many, but low single figures possible in some sheltered spots across central parts of the UK. Then we begin Wednesday with plenty of sunshine. Eastern and southern Scotland, England and Wales seeing the best of the blue skies first thing. Thicker cloud arrives from the west across Scotland, and we'll see some light showers affecting mainly central and western parts, drifting into the north of Northern Ireland by the end of the afternoon. A bit cooler where this happens, but actually across much of the UK, it's another warm day with plenty of sunny spells and a brighter day to come for northern Scotland behind the cloud and patchy rain. Thursday, more widespread sunny skies and the warmest day of the week, if not the year, 23 or 24 Celsius.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
It's 12 noon, a very good afternoon. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst. I'm coming up for you this Tuesday lunchtime. We're live at the scene of the search for Madeleine McCann, currently underway in Portugal, with police from Germany and the UK also involved in the most active investigation into her disappearance for some 9 years. Divers joining teams of sniffer dogs and specialist search units at this remote reservoir. Mark White is there for us live. A call for calm after large-scale disorder in Cardiff overnight. Violent clashes between police and young people followed a fatal car crash in which 2 youngsters died. Community leaders say they need to find out why things went so wrong. A major legal blow for Prince Harry. A judge denies him the right to challenge the government over who pays for his security when he's in the UK. What now for his other court cases? And we'll be hosting you at the best B&B in the world, free of charge, so pack your bags for Scarborough. First, though, the latest headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thanks very much. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 1 minute past 12. Police in Portugal investigating the disappearance of Madeleine McCann are carrying out a targeted search of part of a reservoir not far from where she disappeared 16 years ago. Divers have been seen in the water after being advised by German authorities. The main suspect, Christian Bruckner, is facing sex offence charges in Germany and was in Portugal around the time Madeleine disappeared in 2007. Former Scotland Yard detective Peter Blexley told GB News he expects officers are acting on new evidence.
I'm hoping they've found some credible intelligence somewhere else that has directed them to this area, which is pretty substantial. I'm very familiar with Silvish and Praia de Luz. I've been to both of those places many times, and I'm just hoping against hope that this isn't another speculative box-ticking kind of exercise, and that once again credible evidence can be found.
South Wales police have condemned violent scenes in Cardiff last night, which followed a crash in which 2 teenagers died. A clean-up operation is currently underway following the riot, in which police were pelted with missiles, including fireworks, and 2 cars were set on fire. Officers say the level of violence towards emergency services and the damage caused was totally unacceptable. Climate protesters have delayed Shell's annual general meeting by over an hour with a choreographed dance and singing.
Go to hell, Shell, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more. Go to hell, Shell.
Security staff shielded Shell chief executive and the firm's board of directors as climate protesters were carried away after unsuccessfully trying to storm the stage. Security were forced to intervene when several people tried to get up on that stage. The disruptions have delayed the start of that meeting. Meanwhile, a man's been arrested after throwing a Just Stop Oil protester to the ground during a protest in central London. Well, it's after 45 protesters marched on 3 major routes near London and Tower Bridge. They're calling for no new oil, gas or coal projects in the UK. In a statement, the group said more and more people are realising taking action is the right thing to do. The Duke of Sussex has lost his bid to legally challenge the Home Office's decision to block him from paying for police protection whilst he's in the UK. Prince Harry had wanted to foot the bill himself after being told he would no longer receive the same degree of protection as a working royal when visiting the country. The decision comes a week after Harry and Meghan say they were chased through New York at high speed by paparazzi. The International Monetary Fund says it's not expecting the UK to enter into recession this year. It says the growth remains subdued, forecasting growth of 0.4% this year. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says the report credits the government's action to restore stability and tame inflation.
I also say we've acted decisively to fight inflation, which will substantially reduce to around 5% by the end of the year. And the IMF say that our approach to fiscal policy will help to significantly reduce the deficit over the forecast by 3% of GDP between 22-23 and 27-28. So together these forecasts demonstrate that we're on the right path, but the job is not done yet.
Government borrowing, meanwhile, ballooned to £25.6 billion last month. That's the second highest figure for April on record, behind only April 2020 during the first lockdown. The Office for National Statistics puts it down to the energy support schemes, higher benefit payments and rising debt interest. Council workers, school support staff and refuse collectors are among those being balloted on further strike action over pay. Their union, Unison, says the offered flat rate pay rise of less than £2,000 is nowhere near enough. Meanwhile, almost 300,000 members of the Royal College of Nursing in England are voting on whether to renew their mandate for industrial action after rejecting a 5% pay rise. Head of local government for Unison, Mike Short, told us the offer isn't good enough.
The pay offer that our members have been given is below inflation, whatever your current pay rate is. They're the people who kept our communities going through COVID, provided warm places for older people to go when they can't afford their higher energy bills. They've got massive increases in food prices. They keep our parks nice. They educate our children in our schools. That's why they deserve a decent pay increase. And the offer on the table isn't that.
5 new species will now be protected from the ivory trade. They include hippos, walruses and orcas. It's already illegal to trade elephant and rhino ivory. Punishment for breaching the Act is an unlimited fine or up to 5 years in jail. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Tamsin, thank you very much indeed. So that intensive search actually going on now in Portugal for missing Madeleine McCann, the most involved stage of a long-running investigation since 2014. Well, police divers have been searching the reservoir in a remote part of the Algarve, some 30 miles from where she went missing 16 years ago. Officers from the UK joining German police and specialist Portuguese search teams in a huge operation. So let's cross live to the scene now and get the latest with our Home and Security editor, Mark White. And Mark, as we've indicated, a lot of resources being put into this.
Yeah, we've watched as dozens and dozens of police and other specialist search teams arrived here this morning to begin this search in earnest. At first light, in fact, we saw a rigid inflatable from the Fire and Rescue Service test the waters around here for the dive teams who over the course of the next 2 to 3 days will be conducting some of the searches in the water. It's going to be really on the west side of the Arad Reservoir, which is about 30 miles from the holiday resort of Praia de Luz, where Madeleine McCann disappeared back in 2007. I'm just going to step out of the way, Mark, actually, so we can give you a better shot of the activity that's happening out on the edges of the reservoir at the moment. What you're looking at the moment as Ben zooms in on these white forensic tents is this sort of western end of the reservoir itself. Quite a few of these forensic and other tents that have been set up to help facilitate the search operation. And then just to the right of them, further down on a little bit of a peninsula that juts out into the reservoir itself, there's at least a dozen or more searchers in that area. They've been there for at least the last hour and a half, so they're concentrating the search on that area. And I think it's clear to me, Mark, that they're definitely working off some specific intelligence. They've not shared that with us, but this is a very wide area. You know, it's a big reservoir. It's 30 odd miles away from Praia de Luz, but yet they're here on this key specific end of the reservoir itself. Something has drawn them to this area. Whether they will actually find anything in the fullness of time, we don't know. It's being reported that there's some suggestion that the police investigating the prime suspect, German national Christian Bruckner, had found some video evidence that suggested he had been at the reservoir at some point, and this may have been the area featured on that video footage. Now, that wouldn't be a surprise, Mark, because we've known for some years that Christian Bruckner liked this area. He lived not too far from this area, so he had a connection. For a while he was in a commune about 7 miles or so from the dam itself, and we're told that he would come here fairly regularly, liked the area, and had spoken to people about how he had viewed this area as his little paradise.
Yeah, and interesting, of course, I think back in 2008, a Portuguese lawyer paid for specialist divers to search this body of water after what we believe was a tip-off from his criminal contacts. So there's been a bit of previous activity at this spot.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because this lawyer felt so strongly about the information that he'd received from the criminal underworld that he privately funded not one but two separate searches by divers off the reservoir. Now, it may be in part that the Germans, taking a renewed look at this, are taking into account some of the evidence that this lawyer amassed. But I should also say that at the time, certainly contacts for Jerry and Kate McCann, the parents of Madeleine McCann, seemed to be quite dismissive of this individual, believed that he was out for his own publicity. But that doesn't mean that, you know, there wasn't an element of truth in the information that he was receiving. So that could be factoring in, as I say, also that knowledge that Christian Bruckner had been here on multiple occasions, and now apparently this video evidence that may have been recovered from either his property or property connected to him. Remember, of course, Mark, just a couple of years back, there was that very intensive search of a caravan trailer park in Hanover in Germany that he had a trailer in for quite some time, and he used to come back and forth when he wasn't in Portugal in the Praia de Luz area. He, back in Germany, was staying in Hanover, so it's possible they have found evidence at that particular site.
Now, you mentioned German police and, of course, those Portuguese specialist search teams, but we understand that there are UK officers there as well with what I guess would be called a watching brief. But, of course, they've never closed the inquiry since it began back in 2007.
No, that's right. I mean, the Germans have a very active inquiry because, of course, Christian Bruckner is in a German prison serving a jail term for the rape of an American tourist in Praia de Luz 2 years before the abduction of Madeleine McCann. We know as well that he was convicted on charges of paedophilia. So they have a very open investigation, ongoing and active investigation, and they have described him as their prime suspect. They have said in terms they believe that this man abducted and then murdered Madeleine McCann. The Portuguese police as well a year ago described and stepped up, if you like, their interest in Christian Bruckner and described him as an arguido, a person of interest and a suspect in this ongoing investigation. Of course, he's been a person of interest for Scotland Yard detectives as well, who, as you say, quite rightly, Mark, continue with their investigation that has still, to this day, taken them to multiple countries as they try to piece together what exactly happened to Madeleine McCann.
And given what we saw behind you there, Mark, with that tented area and the numbers involved, I mean, any indication how long this operation is going to continue there?
Well, I think that depends on what they find in the initial stages. I'll pop out of the way again because, quite frankly, I'm sure the audience is more interested in these images than me. But you can see the reservoir as well around here. It is actually because we've had, it seems, quite a lack of rainfall in this area in recent months. The reservoir itself looks as though it's about 15, 20 feet below what it would normally be after a good old rainy season. So that, in a way, is allowing them, Mark, to penetrate much deeper into the shoreline than they could before. They don't even need necessarily the dive teams to help them out with that. So the area where those searchers are currently standing at the moment would probably be very close to the water's edge, given a healthy season of rainfall there. So they're able, as I say, to get just deeper down into the water. If there is anything, any evidence to be revealed there, it makes that task a little bit easier. But it's a vast undertaking, of course it is.
Yeah.
And that's why we believe, Mark, that there has to be specific intelligence that has taken the German authorities to this spot in the middle of nowhere.
Mark, live for us there at the scene. Thank you very much indeed. And, of course, back to you as soon as we hear any more or discover what might be coming up in terms of that inquiry. Thank you for the moment. But let's now speak to Detective Chief Inspector Mike Neville. Mike, in charge of a missing persons unit back in the early 2000s. Mike, thanks for your time once more here on GB News. As Mark was saying there, we're assuming there is some kind of specific intelligence for them to launch something of this nature so late in the day.
Well, it's been reported that some videos were found in this lair that Bruckner had in Hanover. And if you cast your memory back to the Moors murders, one of the things the police did there, they tried to identify the spots where Hindley and Brady were seen on the moors, where the bodies may be found. So this would seem to be it. My only fear is, and I hope some closure can be brought to this case for all concerned, is that Hans Walters, the Brunswick prosecutor, does seem to be very vocal, very interested in publicity. And he's been promising for about 18 months that he had, quote, concrete evidence that Bruckner was the killer or the kidnapper. And I just fear for the parents that this is another one of his publicity stunts. Let's hope not, but there we are.
Yeah, but I assume that the criticism would be of the German authorities if nothing was done and they didn't follow up every lead, that, they weren't doing enough to find out what happened to Madeleine.
Absolutely. And I think what we need to see, we need to be told what exactly these videos reveal. We know that, as you've said, that Bruckner liked that area, but there's a big gap between liking an area and visiting it and taking a child's body and burying it there. And so let's see what the British police officers, who I'm sure are doing a very professional job, what their opinions are of all this. Yes, every lead has got to be pursued, but let's hope this is a tangible lead that will lead to something in this case.
And what of the issue that you've got Portuguese police, the German police and the UK officers, although they're not directly involved in the search? Does that hamper or hinder the inquiry in any way, or does it just actually add more hands to be able to carry out the operations?
The issue is, of course, all three countries have very different methods of dealing with things. They have very different legal practices across there. If the Portuguese police, think Germans are moving in on their territory, the police can be a very political area. The Met and the City police will argue about cases, never mind when you've got German, Portuguese and British there. But we can only hope that they are working together to bring a successful outcome. But the difference in jurisdiction will become an issue if anything, any evidence or a body is found. Let's hope Madeleine is found alive. That would be the best situation.
Mike, thank you very much indeed for your time joining us here on GB News. And of course, as you say, we'll keep people updated with what's going on there at the scene. Now, eco-protesters from a group called Fossil Free London have been protesting at Shell's annual shareholder meeting in London. It follows a bumper year, of course, for the company, in which they made record profits of £32 billion. Well, at one stage, protesters tried to storm the event in the ExCeL Centre, one woman appearing to faint as she was led away by security staff. Well, let's get the latest now with Ray Addison, our reporter, who's outside the ExCeL Centre where that meeting was being held. Dramatic scenes, it seems, Ray, although the meeting did actually manage to carry on.
Yes, underway as I speak, Mark, but a very difficult morning for Shell's senior executives here at their annual AGM. Security teams having to form a human chain in front of the CEO and the board of directors across that stage as climate protesters tried to unsuccessfully storm the stage and get access to those executives. Now, they were eventually removed from the hall. The start of the AGM itself, however, was delayed by an hour because of chanting and singing. Now, they moved us away from the outdoor protest, but there are cameras inside the AGM, and they captured the scenes.
Go to hell, shell, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more. Go to hell, shell, and don't you come back.
Now, because of all of that chanting, both inside and outside, there's also a lot of drumming going on as well. There has been disruption for people other than those Shell executives. They use the facilities here at the Excel Centre in London for A-level examinations, and I'm being told that they've had to move those students away to the very far end of the Excel Centre because of all the noise which was disrupting their exams. Now, of course, there's not just protests taking place here in East London, about 5.5 miles away from where I'm standing. In central London, there's been protests as well taking place by Just Stop Oil. For the last 5 weeks or so, they've been carrying out slow marches across London. This morning, during rush hour traffic, they were on 3 of London's bridges, including Blackfriars, where an incident occurred between one motorist who seemingly frustrated by being prevented from getting on with his day by these protesters, got out of his vehicle. A couple of protesters were pushed. One fell over and went to the ground, and we're seeing reports that motorist was actually arrested by police officers. Just Stop Oil actually posted a video on their social media saying this is an impossible situation, and asking the question, do we disrupt other ordinary people like this man arrested for lashing out today, or just sit back and watch everything burn? I've had thousands of responses to that tweet. I've been reading through, vast majority of people saying we'd actually like you to stop, please.
Yeah, feelings obviously running high on this issue on both sides. But Ray, down at the Excel Centre, thank you for that. Let's just update you very quickly with a statement that Shell have issued saying, after this disruption, we respect people's right to express their point of view and welcome any constructive engagement on our strategy in the energy transition. However, yet again, they say protesters have shown that they are not interested in constructive engagement. That's the official statement from Shell. We'll see what the protesters make of that, of course. Also coming up, Prince Harry loses his latest legal challenge to make private payments for police protection when he's in the UK. What next for his legal battles? So we'll be updating you on that. Stay with us.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Oh, welcome back to GB News Live. Now, Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, has lost his latest bid to bring a High Court challenge against the Home Office over his security arrangements in the UK. It will not now go to a full hearing. Prince Harry had brought that challenge over a decision that he should not be allowed to pay privately for Home Office public protective security, effectively, when he's in the UK. Let's make more sense of this with legal commentator Joshua Rosenberg, who I'm very glad to say can join us in the studio. Joshua, great to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Very good to be here.
Just to explain to people, this is his second bite at the cherry. It's not even a full case. It was whether it goes to a judicial hearing, effectively.
Exactly so. In order to bring a claim for judicial review, you need permission. Often that's granted without any problem at all, but on this occasion it was challenged. Last year, a judge gave him limited permission on some quite narrow technical grounds. He clearly wasn't happy with that. He didn't think that this was going to be enough. And so he's brought a new challenge. He says the decision on whether he should have police protection shouldn't be one for a committee known as RAVEC.
Yes, the Executive Committee for Protection of Royalty and Public Figures.
That's what it's called now.
No wonder they go for an acronym.
Exactly, and it's not the right acronym, as you will have worked out. It used to stand for Royal and VIP Executive Committee.
Right.
Anyway, RAVEC has people from the Royal Household, people from the Metropolitan Police, officials on it. And they looked at this last year and they said, no, you can't get police protection simply because you can afford to pay for it. That would lead to all sorts of problems. It would mean that there would be less protection for people who can't pay for it. It would be an unfortunate precedent.
Yeah,
there would
not
be
appropriate for wealthy people to buy protective security with the Home Office position.
That's exactly the position. So what he was trying to persuade the High Court judge, Mr. Justice Chamberlain, at a hearing earlier this month, was that this shouldn't be a decision for RAVEC. It should be a decision from for the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, because she supervises this committee, she has to come up with the money for it, and she should have taken the decision. And what Mr. Justice Chamberlain has said is, no, it's a matter for RAVEC. They looked at this, and so we're not going to allow you to go ahead on this basis.
Right. Was there another issue, and in that committee can actually decide if there's a public interest element, i.e. that security perhaps can be provided if there's a public interest? And I wonder what his team would have made of that.
Well, absolutely. I mean, what they said was protective security is provided by police officers who are obliged to put themselves in harm's way to protect their principal in the public interest and the interest of the state. That interest could be justified only where the state has decided that it's in the public interest and has provided public money. That's a matter for ministers, and he says that that's why it should have been a matter for the Home Secretary. But nevertheless, RAVEC says it's inconsistent with those principles for an individual to be able to achieve a level of protective security which the state has said is not justified in the public interest.
Yeah. So clearly, in terms of the law in Britain, he is being regarded as a private individual rather than what would have been a VIP, even though he's a member of the royal family.
Yes, but in certain circumstances he does get security. For example, when he went to the coronation.
Yeah, indeed.
He got security there. I read, I don't know if this is true, that he had security when he left the coronation, provided by the police, but then he had to swap cars before he got to the airport.
Interesting.
So, some security is provided, but not what he had when he was a working
And, of course,
member.
we're expecting him now in June back in London for another court case to do with the whole aspect of alleged eavesdropping, even though it's not, as the papers say, phone tapping. He will have to arrange private security now for that particular visit, we assume.
We don't know exactly what arrangements will be made. I mean, obviously the police are not going to allow him to put himself in danger.
Yeah. Because clearly there'll be an outcry if something happens when he's...
You know, we know that he will be going to the High Court in London to give evidence. He will be in the witness box. He will be in the public courtroom. It would be extraordinary if the police did not take that into account and provide what they regard as an appropriate level of security for that particular visit to London. But that's not the same as having the security that he used to have, in particular when he's driving or whatever it may be. And you can see why he's concerned about that.
Yeah, close protection officer from the Royal Unit,
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, car chases and all of that, you know, are very sensitive subjects.
Well, this is obviously uppermost in their mind, what happened in New York. But the other question, how much will this have cost him so far?
It's certainly costing him a lot of money. It's not as much as a full trial with everybody in court and witnesses.
Because this is not a criminal
It's not
case.
criminal and it's not a full hearing. It's only a preliminary hearing. But he did have 3 barristers in the High Court last week, including a KC and 2 juniors. And because he's lost this, in principle, he'll have to pay the costs incurred by the Home Secretary and the Metropolitan Police. So, you know, it's a substantial sum of money, but, you know, clearly he thinks it's very important.
Are more lawyers to pay with the other cases as well?
Oh, yeah, that really will be expensive.
OK. Joshua, as ever, thank you for being with us. Great to have you in the studio. Much appreciated. More reaction, of course, to come to that, and we'll update you on that Madeleine McCann search. But let's get the latest headlines now with Tamsin. Much appreciated.
Headlines at 12:32. Police in Portugal investigating the disappearance of Madeleine McCann are carrying out a targeted search across a reservoir not far from where she disappeared 16 years ago. Divers have been seen in the water after being advised by German authorities. The main suspect, Christian Bruckner, is facing sex offence charges in Germany and was in Portugal around the time Madeleine disappeared in 2007. South Wales Police have condemned violent scenes in Cardiff last night, which followed a crash in which 2 teenagers died. A clean-up operation is currently underway following the riot, in which police were pelted with missiles, including fireworks, and 2 cars were set alight. Officers say the level of violence towards emergency services and the damage caused was totally unacceptable. Climate protesters have tried to storm the stage at Shell's annual general meeting. Security staff shielded Shell's chief executive as the protesters were carried away. Activists also caused disruption by singing and dancing, delaying the start of the meeting by more than an hour. The Duke of Sussex has lost his bid to legally challenge the Home Office's decision to block him from paying for police protection whilst he's in the UK. Prince Harry had wanted to foot the bill himself after being told he would no longer receive the same degree of protection as a working royal when visiting. The decision comes a week after Harry and Meghan say they were chased through New York at high speed by paparazzi. The International Monetary Fund says it's not expecting the UK to enter into a recession this year. It says the growth remains subdued, forecasting growth of 0.4% this year. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says the report credits the government's action to restore stability and tame inflation. This is GB News. You can get more on all of these stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Tamsin, thank you very much indeed. Let's head to the Commons now, because we're being told there's an urgent question being asked as regards...
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Dry and bright for most of us today, but cloudier skies at times compared with the last couple of days, I think, especially in the south. And in the north, the thick cloud could bring some drizzle at times.
I think we're going to break into the weather forecast, take you straight to the House of Commons. An urgent question being asked in regards of Suella Braverman and her speeding issues.
In conduct to Parliament and the public. The Prime Minister is the ultimate judge of standards of behaviour expected of a minister and the appropriate consequences of a breach of those standards. Ministers only remain in office for so long as they can retain the confidence of the Prime Minister. The independent adviser The independent adviser on ministers' interests is appointed by the Prime Minister to advise on matters relating to the ministerial code, and as honourable members will be aware, this may include considering matters of ministerial conduct. The independent adviser has published terms of reference which state that if there is an allegation about a breach of the ministerial code and the Prime Minister, having consulted the Cabinet Secretary, feels that it warrants further investigation, he may ask the Cabinet Office to investigate the facts of the case and or refer the matter to the independent adviser on ministers' interests. With regards to the matter concerning the Home Secretary, which has been the subject of recent coverage, the Prime Minister made clear to the House yesterday that he is receiving information on the issues raised. Since returning from the G7, the Prime Minister has met both the independent adviser and the Home Secretary and asked for further information. It is right that the Prime Minister, as the head of the executive and the arbiter of the ministerial code, be allowed time to receive relevant information on this matter. Honourable members will be updated on this in due course.
Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question, and it is an urgent matter because our constituents expect those who make the rules to follow the rules, especially the minister responsible for upholding the law. There are serious questions to answer following reports that the Home Secretary asked civil servants to organise a private speeding course. So can he start by confirming whether the Home Secretary did or did not ask civil servants for help in this matter? After days of delay, and as the Minister has just pointed out again, the Prime Minister still hasn't decided whether there should be an investigation by his ethics adviser. When can we expect to know what the Prime Minister is thinking on this matter? And when did the Prime Minister be made aware of this issue, when he appointed the Home Secretary or not? The Ministerial Code is clear that ministers will not use their position for personal gain or ask civil servants to help them in a private matter. Does the Minister condone attempts to use civil service for personal matters? Or does he think that any potential breach of this principle should result in an investigation? Reports suggest that officials raised concerns, Mr. Speaker, about the Home Secretary's conduct in emails sent to the Cabinet Office with the Permanent Secretary's full awareness. Officials are said to have been instructed to disregard the request. Was this the case? And on what basis? Furthermore, if the Home Secretary did authorise her special adviser to tell journalists that there was not a speeding penalty, this would surely be classified as the Minister asking officials to breach the Civil Service Code. And does he agree this amounts to a breach of the Ministerial Code? As ministers know, the Home Secretary has already admitted to breaching the Ministerial Code by using personal emails to share sensitive government information. So I ask the Minister today, how many strikes before she's out?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Right Honourable Lady has made a number of contentions there, and I'm not, Mr. Speaker, going to get into speculation about the events in question. The Right Honourable Lady will have heard the Prime Minister being very clear yesterday. He was informed of these issues whilst on service of the country in Tokyo at the G7. He was in Japan at the G7. He has returned from the G7. He is gathering the information. What you know of the Prime Minister is that he will deal with these issues properly and professionally. But the first point of that is to gather the information required on which he can take a view. And that is what he is doing.
Sir Jeremy Wright.
My right honourable friend will recall that the Committee on Standards in Public Life, when I was a member of it, recommended that the independent adviser should be able to initiate their own inquiries into breaches of the Ministerial Code, should be able to determine whether there was a breach, leaving, of course, properly sanctions for the Prime Minister to determine. That has several advantages. It gives the benefit of a decision being taken at arm's length from government, and if I may say to my right honourable friend, it would also mean we will have fewer occasions such as this, and he'll have to answer fewer UQs like this.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. what the honourable gentleman says, of course, is true. It is always a pleasure to be before this House in any circumstances. And to respond to my right honourable friend, I wouldn't wish us to detract from the fact that the Ministerial Code is a Prime Minister's document. It is a code as to how the Prime Minister expects his ministers or her ministers to behave in a set of circumstances. The Prime Minister is the ultimate judge of that ministerial code. I believe the first independent advisor was appointed in 2006 to have a role to support the Prime Minister in that function. And I think we must recall and remind ourselves that it is actually the ministerial code is the Prime Minister's document, and he needs to be able to take decisions on the back of it regarding his ministerial team.
SNP spokesperson Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a descent into absolute farce. Instead of professionalism, accountability and integrity that the Prime Minister promised when he came into office, we are faced with calamity, chaos and corruption. The MP for Uxbridge continues to be investigated. The MP for Stratford-upon-Avon had to leave Cabinet in disgrace, and we are seeing revelation after revelation about the misdeeds and wrongdoings of the Home Secretary. First, the request to organise a personal speed awareness course, and today, the revelation that the Home Secretary did not disclose her extensive work with the Africa Justice Foundation, 19 alumni of which are now in senior positions in the Rwandan government. Mr. Speaker, how can the Prime Minister continue to pretend that he's presiding over a government with anything other than their own personal interests at heart? Isn't it the case that the people of Scotland, and indeed all the people of these Isles, would be better served by politicians who actually understand and stick to the principles of public life and the ministerial code? Will the Prime Minister ensure an investigation is undertaken into all of the alleged ministerial code breaches? Mr. Speaker, what is the point in having a ministerial code if ministers simply ignore it?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, there is information being gathered, and that will be the first point to determine the next steps beyond this. It's always interesting, though, to hear from the SNP about farcical situations with ethics, and the one advantage of a camper van is, I suppose, it doesn't go very fast.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have no first-hand knowledge of this particular case, but does my right honourable friend the Minister agree with me that there is and should always be a difference between asking a civil servant to do something which may or may not be wrong, and asking a civil servant for advice on whether something is or is not likely to be wrong if you do it?
Yes.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course, I would agree that there is a difference there, but I wouldn't wish to speculate about this particular circumstance, as my right honourable friend will understand.
Lloyd Russell Moyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
This is the urgent question to Sir Jeremy Wright, Jeremy Quinn in terms of the situation with Suella Braverman. Sir Jeremy Wright from the backbenches indicating that an independent advisor should be able to launch their own investigation, which rather put the Minister on the spot, saying thank you for that question with a hint of irony. But clearly it is causing some difficulties for the government, with laughter there from the Labour benches. Our Deputy Political Editor Tom Harwood with us. Awkward moments there for Mr Quinn at the dispatch box on this.
Awkward moments, and Jeremy Quinn to some extent has become the new Michael Ellis, who, if you remember back in the days of the Boris Johnson government, always came out to bat for the awkward questions and try and diffuse the situation. That's what we've been seeing here from the dispatch box in the House of Commons. Pretty much a stonewalling response on all of these questions, and there are many different questions coming from different sides of the House. That question of whether the independent ethics advisor should be able to launch investigations without
Minister has to agree to it at the moment, yeah.
Exactly, and we've heard again and again that the ministerial code is the Prime Minister's document, and the independent advisor on ethics was only introduced in 2006 as a means to help the Prime Minister with his work rather than to work against the Prime Minister.
And boy, does he need some help at the moment.
Well, certainly, this has grown as a story into its 4th day now. And it is interesting that, of course, the Speaker chose to grant this urgent question, clearly thinking that there are questions to be answered, particularly on what the Home Secretary admits to, because it's been widely reported in the press. In fact, we've often been talking about this as if it is fact, that the Home Secretary asked civil servants to arrange some sort of other course for her to deal with speeding points. She has not admitted that in public yet at all. There is no statement. Whenever she's asked the question of did this happen, she reverts to saying, I took the points and I paid the fine. No explanation further to that. And that was one of the key questions that Angela Rayner had this morning.
Yeah, and obviously Labour saying, well, this is not the issue. It's actually what you asked your civil servants to do or didn't. The Prime Minister reportedly looking at emails where these officials raised concerns about that request for help in arranging the private speed awareness course. So that appears to be the main contention there. Were they asked directly to organise it themselves as civil servants, which on face value would break the code?
Although, of course, what the Home Secretary's people say and what her allies say is even if she asked for advice on this from civil servants, they said, we can't do that. She said, fair enough, took the points, paid the fine. In her view, or perhaps in the view of her allies, that sort of insulates her from this story. But of course, others would say, well, on a technical level, Home Secretary, you resigned for a technical breach of the rules before, back under the Liz Truss government. This would appear to be a technical breach of the rules.
So did she ask advice, or did she instruct them for actually to do something physically?
Well, the contention is even asking for advice would be a breach of those rules, read in the most, I don't know, legalistic way.
Yeah, the other issue, which was raised there in that session, is that she may be facing fresh allegations of a code breach over a failure, allegedly, to disclose years of previous work with the Rwandan government. Suggestion is she'd co-founded a charity with Sherry Blair called the Africa Justice Foundation, which trained Rwandan government lawyers between 2010 and 2015. And of course now, basically, because she's pushing so hard for the Rwanda policy, suggestion she should have made that perhaps more public.
Yes, and this isn't a good look. Of course, what Suella Braverman says is that she resigned from that charity before she became an MP, so many, many years ago, and never took money from that charity. It was voluntary work that she was doing, charity work that she was doing alongside Sherry Blair. What the contention is, however, is that a number of those that were involved in the charity are now part of the Rwandan government. Although taking a step back from this, of course, the Rwanda policy was conceived under an entirely different Home Secretary, and indeed 2 Prime Ministers ago. It was Priti Patel and Boris Johnson who drew up the Rwanda policy.
And just took the brief on.
And Suella Braverman took the brief on. Now what the criticism is she's been a fervent supporter of that policy, but it would be very hard to argue, perhaps even misleading to suggest, that she conceived of the Rwanda policy.
Last thought, and you've indicated how many days this has gone on. We've got PMQs tomorrow, Prime Minister's questions. One can see what the attack line is going to be from Labour. She becomes the story yet again. And that's when it becomes difficult for a political figure, when they become the story rather than actually trying to carry out government as such.
Absolutely, and I think one of the difficulties for the Prime Minister, as his spokesman has confirmed within the last hour, is that an investigation, a decision on an investigation has not been taken. Now, if I were a betting man, I'd suggest that we would be hearing that decision before or shortly before Prime Minister's questions tomorrow. Very often what happens is the Prime Minister will leave it to the last possible moment, hoping that Sir Keir Starmer will ask on these and wrong-foot him perhaps in the first answer. It'll be interesting to watch.
It's going to be a fascinating one, so stay with us for that tomorrow, of course, here on GB News Live. For the moment, Tom, thank you, but we'll keep watching this space with developments coming through minute by minute, it seems, on this particular story. Now, witness statements have been read out at Newcastle Crown Court, where the murderer of 7-year-old Nikki Allen is being sentenced today. David Boyd murdered her in 1992 after beating her with a brick and repeatedly stabbing her before dumping her body in a derelict old exchange building in Sunderland. Let's get more with our national reporter Paul Hawkins, who's been following events there. And we've heard effectively a witness statement or a victim statement from her mother about what this has done to the family.
Yeah, that's right. Nicky's mum, Sharon, choosing not to be in the courtroom, in fact, not even to be in the building to hear this morning's aggravating factors and mitigations read out by the two lawyers to the judge. We did hear victim impact statements, as you say, Mark, from Sharon, Nicky's mum, and also her father, David. Sharon describing Nicky as a bright and sparkly child with a beautiful smile. She had to endure the horror of that 1992 trial and acquittal, the acquittal of George Corrin, of course, who was wrongly accused of Nicky's murder. She was accused, she says, of being a bad mother, and she speaks to Nicky all the time and tells her that she will never give up. She went on to describe her fight for justice as tireless and endless, and said it had left a deteriorating mental and physical health, a deteriorating effect, I should say, to her mental and physical health. She's been sectioned, she's been in hospital a few times, such has been the effect on her mental health. It's left her feeling frustrated, as I've felt like I'd not been listened to. My life and that of my family has never been the same since Nicky was murdered. David Boyd destroyed the life of my beautiful daughter, my life and the lives of my daughters and grandchildren. We then heard a victim impact statement from Nicky's father, David, who said that from that night my life changed forever. I have feelings of anger and hatred. He described how he'd used alcohol ever since that night to self-medicate, and he's never been able to walk past the old Exchange building since that night. I think about her lying in the building and wishing decisions in my early life had been different, so she may have lived. Justice brings little comfort or change to my life. So we were expecting to hear a victim impact statement from George Corrin, who was wrongfully accused, but the judge decided it would be inappropriate to read that out at this stage. We then heard submissions from both the CPS and David Boyd's lawyer in terms of aggravating factors. No mitigations were offered. The judge has said she'll deliver her sentence after 2 o'clock. We know it will be a life sentence. The question is, will it be a whole life sentence? That is possible, or a life sentence with a minimum term. One would have thought that that would be at least 30 years, but we'll find out from the judge sometime after 2 o'clock.
Back to you for that, Paul, and we understand maybe that sentencing will be televised as well in terms of the judge's comments, so more on that a little later. But let's bring you some breaking news now, and it's being reported that Rolf Harris, the disgraced entertainer and TV musician and cartoonist, one of Britain's biggest stars, of course, at one stage, has died at the age of 93. Reports, of course, suggested he'd been very ill with neck cancer after leaving prison some 6 years ago, and had been living effectively as a recluse with his wife, who was suffering from dementia in Bray. Now, earlier this month, a private ambulance had been filmed outside his riverside home on the Thames, but sources close to the family now say it is the case that he has passed away. Of course, disgraced in terms of the investigations into his dealings with children and alleged paedophilia, and of course he had been imprisoned for that, and was released to his home then. In terms of his health, it rapidly turned to a serious situation, we're being told, when this neck cancer was found. But now it appears he has died, the convicted paedophile, as he is or was at the age of 93. More, of course, on that as it comes through. Now, South Wales Police condemning violent scenes in Cardiff last night. It followed a crash in which 2 teenagers died. They say the behaviour was totally unacceptable. A widespread disorder erupted after the collision in the Ely district of the city at 6 yesterday evening, and then the violence continuing until the early hours of the morning, with several vehicles being set alight. And you can see, of course, there in these pictures, the aftermath. Well, let's get more with our reporter, Jack Carson, who's at the scene. And Jack, extraordinary scenes, and police, as well as the local community, they're scratching their heads thinking, what on earth happened?
Yeah, that's right. So it was after that collision that everything seemed to kick off. Police arrived on the scene just up the road here from Stanway Road, where we are here in Ely, just outside of Cardiff city centre. Police arrived around 6 o'clock. It was in that period between 6 and 8 o'clock when the South Wales Police then tweeted that they were having to not only deal with the collision but also disorder that had started as well, that apparently rumours had started going around that the incident involving the two boys that had been killed was the result of a police chase. That has not been confirmed, and South Wales Police have denied that that was the case. But of course, with rumours going around on social media, what it meant is that more people started to gather to find out what it was. Those rumours on social media spread a little bit like wildfire, and before you know it, there was around 100 to 150 people gathered around this area going into the early hours of the morning. Fireworks being thrown, missiles being thrown along the street. You can see some of the results of some of the incidents here with this car behind me, which has had windows smashed. There's also burn marks on the tarmac as well. You can still smell some of the smoke from the burning of that tarmac. 2 cars were also burnt, one flipped over and then set on fire. And of course, residents and police, as you mentioned, both scratching their heads, wondering how this violence escalated. South Wales Police are investigating the disorder last night, as well as that collision, of course, where 2 boys sadly have now died. Not only, of course, with that collision, arrests have been made apparently as well. South Wales Police are set to release another statement again today, but the destruction here, most of the destruction has been cleared away, but you can still see some of it with the cars, with the windows, as well as one car up there which had a wing mirror smashed and paint chucked all over as well. So the clear up is still going on here in Cardiff this afternoon.
Yeah, and we think urgent question to be asked in the Senate as well as to exactly what happened and to find out why it turned so violent so quickly. But Jack, for the moment in Ely District there at Cardiff, thank you very much indeed for that. Coming up in this next hour here on GB News Live, back to Portugal as the search continues for missing Madeleine McCann, and more of that breaking news, of course, that Rolf Harris, the disgraced entertainer, has died at the age of 93, of course, found guilty of 12 counts of indecent assault, sentenced to 5 months and 9 months in jail, has died at home at Bray of neck cancer. More coming up in the next hour. Stay with us on GB News Live.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News. the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 1 o'clock. A very good afternoon. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up this Tuesday lunchtime, confirmation that convicted paedophile Rolf Harris has died at the age of 93. He was said to have been suffering from neck cancer after being released from jail following his convictions for indecent assault. Police in Portugal appear to be acting on specific intelligence in their search of a reservoir for missing Madeleine McCann, now concentrating their efforts on a particular area of water. Our security editor Mark White is live there at the scene and will update us shortly. Did rumours on social media after a fatal car crash in which 2 youngsters died prompt last night's riot in Cardiff? Community leaders say they need to find out why things went so wrong so quickly. And still gathering information on speeding Suella, the government dragged to the Commons to answer an urgent question about what the Home Secretary did after being caught speeding. The Prime Minister yet to decide on whether to call in the ethics watchdog. Also coming up, we'll be hosting you at the best B&B in the world, free of charge, so pack your bags for Scarborough. We will get there. First, though, the latest headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom at 1:01. Convicted sex offender Rolf Harris has died aged 93. The Australian-born artist and children's TV presenter was a family favourite for decades before he was convicted of 12 indecent assaults in 2014. His catalogue of abuse included an 8-year-old autograph hunter, 2 girls in their early teens and a friend of his daughter. Following his conviction, Harris was stripped of his CBE, which he received after painting the Queen's 80th birthday portrait. Labour has accused the Prime Minister of dither and delay as he continues to consider whether to order an investigation into the Home Secretary's conduct. Suella Braverman is accused of breaching the ministerial code by asking civil servants to organise a private speed awareness course. She maintains nothing untoward took place. But the Deputy Labour leader, Angela Rayner, says there are serious questions to be answered. Police in Portugal investigating the disappearance of Madeleine McCann are carrying out a targeted search of part of a reservoir not far from where she disappeared 16 years ago. Divers have been seen in the water after being advised by German authorities. The main suspect, Christian Bruckner, is facing sex offence charges in Germany and was in Portugal around the time Madeleine disappeared in 2007. South Wales police have condemned violent scenes in Cardiff last night, which followed a crash in which 2 teenagers died. A clean-up operation is currently underway following the riot in which police were pelted with missiles, including fireworks, and 2 cars were set alight. Officers say the level of violence towards emergency services and the damage caused was totally unacceptable. Overseas students will be banned from bringing dependents to the UK from next January. The ban, which attempts to bring down migration, won't include the students in postgraduate research programmes. International students will also not be able to switch out of the student route to work before completing their studies. Climate protesters delayed Shell's annual general meeting by over an hour today with a choreographed dance and singing.
Go to hell, Shell, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more. Go to hell, Shell.
Security staff shielded Shell's chief executive as climate protesters were carried away after unsuccessfully trying to storm the stage. The disruptions delayed the start of the meeting by an hour. Meanwhile, a man's been arrested after throwing a Just Stop Oil protester to the ground during a protest in central London. It's after 45 protesters marched on 3 major routes near London and Tower Bridge. They're calling for no new oil, gas or coal projects in the UK. In a statement, the group said more and more people are realising taking action is the right thing to do. The International Monetary Fund says it's not expecting the UK to enter into a recession this year. It says the growth remains subdued, forecasting growth of 0.4% this year. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says the report credits the government's action to restore stability and tame inflation.
I also say we've acted decisively to fight inflation, which will substantially reduce to around 5% by the end of the year. And the IMF say that our approach to fiscal policy will help to significantly reduce the deficit over the forecast by 3% of GDP between 22-23 and 27-28. So together these forecasts demonstrate that we're on the right path, but the job is not done yet.
Duke of Sussex has lost his bid to legally challenge the Home Office's decision to block him from paying for police protection whilst he's in the UK. Prince Harry had wanted to foot the bill himself after being told he would no longer receive the same degree of protection as a working royal when visiting the country. The decision comes a week after Harry and Meghan say they were chased through New York at high speed by paparazzi. 5 new species will now be protected from the ivory trade. They include hippos, walruses and orcas. It's already illegal to trade elephant and rhino ivory. Punishment for breaching the act is an unlimited fine or up to 5 years in jail. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Welcome back to GB News Live. So a confirmation now that the disgraced entertainer, convicted sex offender Rolf Harris has died at the age of 93. The PA news agency, Press Association, saying that the news was confirmed by a registrar at Maidenhead Town Hall. A private ambulance had been seen at his home at Bray on the banks of the Thames some weeks ago. He had been known to be suffering from neck cancer, but now confirmation that he has died. Of course, the TV presenter, well, effectively a family favourite for decades on television, was convicted of a string of indecent assaults back in June 2014, including one on an 8-year-old autograph hunter, 2 on girls in their early teens, and then also a catalogue of abuses the court heard against his daughter's friend over a period of 16 years. He was jailed for 5 years and 9 months after convicted of 12 assaults between 1968 and 1986, although he was cleared of other unconnected historical sex offences which he had denied. He was released on licence from HMP Stafford in May 2017, less than 3 years after his sentence began, and then effectively became a recluse at his home in Bray, as we say, on the banks of the Thames. His wife then suffering from dementia. In terms of his standing as various honours, including his CBE, was stripped from him, his BAFTA fellowship removed, and all his Australian honours taken away as well. Of course, he was part of the Operation U-Tree high-profile sex crime investigation, which also included the entertainer Jimmy Savile. So that news just coming through to us from Press Association that he has died at the age of 93. Now, the German prosecutor leading the investigation into Madeleine McCann's disappearance has said that the major search underway at a reservoir on the Algarve in Portugal is because of a, quote, tip-off. Christian Wolters, the state prosecutor in Braunschweig, said the operation had been instigated on the basis of certain information. Well, officers in the UK joining German police and the Portuguese search teams in a huge operation there. Our Home and Security editor Mark White is there at the scene and sent this report.
At the edge of the Arad Reservoir, a fire and rescue service, rigid inflatable, was visible at first light, testing the waters for the dive teams who'll spend the next few days in a targeted search of this area. Throughout the morning, dozens of police and other officials arrived at this makeshift staging area for briefings inside these blue tents before being deployed to their search grids. 16 years on from the disappearance of Madeleine McCann in the resort of Praia de Luz, there is still no concrete evidence of what happened to the 3-year-old. But both Portuguese and German police are convinced convicted sex offender Christian Bruckner is the man responsible for her abduction. He's currently serving 7 years in a German prison for the rape of an American tourist in Praia de Luz 2 years before Madeleine's disappearance. About half a mile from the staging area, another group of tents are visible in woodland just back from the shoreline. It was the German authorities who requested this latest search. It's reported that Christian Bruckner used to visit this area around the dam on a regular basis. It's a spot that he was apparently particularly fond of. In fact, he lived just about 7 miles from here for a while in a commune, and Praia de Luz itself is only some 20 miles further down the road. The German authorities have not yet said what's brought them to this area, miles from anywhere. But it is the first major search operation in the Algarve for almost a decade, since the Metropolitan Police asked for a series of digs around the Praia de Luz area in 2014. A small group of Scotland Yard detectives are out here this week as official observers. Of course, there is always intense public interest anytime there are developments in this more than a decade and a half long mystery. Madeleine McCann's parents, who've seen many false dawns in this protracted investigation, are being kept informed about the progress of this latest search. Mark White, GB News at the Arad Dam on the Algarve.
Well, let's cross live now to join Mark to get the very latest there. And Mark, I gather there's an update from the Met Police as to why they're also involved in this particular operation there.
Yes, indeed. Detective Chief Inspector Mark Cranwell, who is leading that protracted investigation into the disappearance of Madeleine McCann from the UK perspective, has issued a statement thanking the Portuguese and the German authorities for allowing his detectives to come across to the Algarve to observe the operation that's ongoing here at the Arde Dam, where they can see this operation as it unfolds over the coming days, and will be able to feed information directly back to Madeleine's parents, Jerry and Kate McCann, who have been kept up to date with the latest developments. We've also been hearing in the last few minutes from the chief prosecutor in Germany, who is handling the investigation against the prime suspect, Christian Bruckner, who, of course, as we know, is being held in a German prison, serving a sentence for serious sexual offences, the rape of an American tourist in Praia de Luz, the resort that Madeleine disappeared from in 2007. This rape took place 2 years before Madeleine's disappearance. He's always denied any involvement in the 3-year-old's abduction, but German authorities say they have key evidence that points to Christian Bruckner as being responsible for the abduction and, they say, subsequent murder of Madeleine McCann. The prosecutor, Christian Walters, who is in charge of the case from the German authorities' perspective, has been saying today that the reason they're here at this reservoir, which is some 30 miles from Praia de Luz, is that they have received a tip-off, that they received information that has taken them to the reservoir, and that is, I think, obvious from what we're seeing today, that they have specific intelligence. I'll get out of the way again, Mark, and give you that shot down towards the forensic tents. This, for the moment, is the only area of searching around this large reservoir about 30 miles from Praia da Luz on the western side of the reservoir. A number of these forensic tents. We did see a couple of dozen searchers that were searching the peninsula there. We understand that they have ground penetrating radar. They have been sticking long metal probes into the ground that we've been able to film in the last hour or two as well. We think they're probably broken for lunch just now as they were all mustering around one of the forensic tents there and seem to have disappeared for the moment. But Christian Wolters, the chief prosecutor from the German side, indicating that this search is not going to be over in 1 or 2 hours. It's going to run into days. And I guess, Mark, it really depends on what they find in terms of just how long they remain out here. It is a significant operation, though.
Yeah, and perhaps we assumed because we saw that rigid inflatable boat and the information about the divers that this was going to concentrate on the reservoir itself, the body of water. But as we can see there, it's the shoreline particularly as well that they're concentrating on.
Yeah, we're told that the vast majority of the search operation will be on the land around the western end of the reservoir. There may well be some divers in the water at some point, but they've been aided by the fact that the reservoir itself is shallower than normal, some 15 to 20 feet lower than normal because of the lack of rainfall in this area of late. And that's enabling these search teams just to penetrate deeper down into the shoreline than they would have been able to do before. But certainly for the moment, although we saw, as you said, that rigid inflatable boat out there, and we understand there will be a dive element, it is concentrated on the land just now.
OK, Mark, for the moment, thank you very much for updating us there at the scene. Back to you, of course, as soon as we hear or see any more in that quite intensive operation that's underway. But let's speak now to Charlie Hedges, who's former head of the Missing Children's Unit at the National Crime Agency. Charlie, thank you for your time. As Mark was indicating there, we assume from what the Germans are saying, there's something pretty specific being forwarded to the police forces as to why they've launched this intensive operation.
Yes, it's a big operation, operating on an international level with large numbers of resources, and if nothing else, it's an expensive operation to run. So clearly there must be some good information upon which they're basing this search to take place.
And from what we've seen, I mean, obviously they've got the boat and they're on the water with divers, but also the shoreline as well, with what seems to be quite a sort of intensive hand operation with many officers on the ground. Do you think that there's something specific that they're looking for in terms of, well, you know, it might be now 16 years or more in terms of finding anything of clothing or anything of that nature?
Yeah, unfortunately, everything we talk about at the moment is pure speculation, not being privy to all the details of what's going on and why. But I'm certain there would be a thorough assessment of the information and intelligence that's available and make a plan as to how they're going to conduct the search, bearing in mind what it is they're looking for and what are the best resources to do it. Yeah. So it's a well-practiced art. It's not a science, it's an art, and it has to be followed in different ways to try and find the answers they're looking for.
Well, that's an interesting point because, of course, we've got effectively 3 different police forces involved. We've got the Germans who are leading it, seemingly, the Portuguese officers on the ground, and, of course, Scotland Yard, the Met, obviously, there as well, supporting them, as they say. All 3 agencies having, I guess, different ways of working.
Yes, but in these sort of situations, they will come together to take the right way forward and have the right strategic planning. The Portuguese police, obviously, it's their area, it's their case, and they will lead on aspects of that, ably assisted by the German police, who will have the information that they've gleaned from their intelligence inquiries and from their work with Christian Buchner, and the UK police, because of their involvement with being a UK citizen and the links to the family, So they'll all work together and come to a conclusion about what is the best way to approach this.
And of course, we talk about the family and their difficulties over all these years, and of course now seeing this once more taking place, and perhaps all the questions being rerun through their minds. This is a very difficult time for everyone who's been involved for so many years.
Yes, all of these cases are so difficult when someone goes missing, not having the answers, and when it goes on for as long as this case does, it's just incredibly difficult for the family, and there must be mixed emotions about hope that something's going to be found, but not at the same time hoping that their expectations won't be raised and then dashed once again. So we must think about them. They're the ones who are left behind having to endure this pain and difficulty over so many years.
Yeah, having just, of course, marked the 16th anniversary recently with a statement that was released to the public that they have no words to describe, of course, what they're having to go through. Charlie, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts. Of course, we will keep people updated on the events there. Just to remind you, Detective Chief Inspector Mark Cranwell from the Met saying the Met continues to work with and support colleagues in Portugal and Germany and the officers there so we can inform Madeleine's family of any developments. More, of course, as we get it. Also coming up, what caused that violent disorder in Cardiff overnight between police and young people after a fatal car crash? We'll have an update for you from the scene.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Let's just update you on that breaking news we had on the death of Rolf Harris at the age of 93. His family have just released a statement via their solicitors. This is to confirm that Rolf Harris recently died peacefully, surrounded by family and friends, and has now been laid to rest. They ask that you respect their privacy. No further comment will be made, but of course there were pictures of a private ambulance seen at his home at Bray some weeks ago, so an indication that it may well be that the official recognition is being released now, but he may have died some time ago. But the family is saying that there will be no further comment made. Now, South Wales police have condemned violent scenes in Cardiff last night after a crash in which 2 teenagers died. Tensions then after a collision at 6 p.m. yesterday, with officers describing a level of violence towards the emergency services as being totally unacceptable, including vehicles being set alight. Let's get more with our reporter Jack Carson at the scene for us. And Jack, I think urgent question being asked in the Senate this afternoon as to exactly what unfolded. Were the suggestions that these rumours were on social media immediately after the accident, causing that reaction to the police particularly?
Yeah, that's right. Members in the Senate around 1:30 were expected to have some kind of statement on this incident that happened here in Ely, just outside of Cardiff last night. That incident, that collision which caused the death of 2 young boys, happened not far from here on Stanway Road, where we are, in just outside, of course, Cardiff in Ely. The police arrived on the scene at around 6 o'clock at night. Then at 8 o'clock, South Wales police tweeted that not only were they dealing with that collision, but they were starting to deal with some disorder that was happening around the area. Now, Alan Michael, who's the South Wales Police and Crime Commissioner, has said that it's thought that rumours were going around essentially on social media that the police were involved in the cause of those 2 boys' death in some kind of police chase. Now, South Wales police said say that is not the case, and of course their investigations into that collision are ongoing. But what it meant was that more people gathered at the scene. Some members of the community interested, and of course there to support their fellow members of the community, but also people from coming in from outer areas that don't necessarily live here, after seeing things like Facebook Lives, YouTube live streams as well, and of course those rumours going around that it was a police chase which had caused that incident. That then meant that around 100 to 150 people were gathered here on Stanway Road in Ely all throughout the early hours of the morning. You can see some of the destruction that was caused by those riots around me. You've got the car there with no back window. We've got a car over here with few broken windows as well. There's scars on the tarmac from where a car was burnt. We've also got a wing mirror there, and paint splattered all over that car. Missiles were thrown apparently also at police. They had protective gear like riot gear, and special police teams were deployed here. But 12 police in the incidents last night were injured. Thankfully, none of them are life-threatening. But of course, the police, as well as investigating the collision that happened here, they're also investigating now this disorder. Arrests have been made. It's not been said how many arrests that was. But of course, this morning and this afternoon, as this clear-up has started and this community has started to come together, you're right, rightly, questions are being asked as to how that breakdown in communication between the police and the community here led to those riots last night.
And have we got any indication what will be happening tonight, whether there'll be additional police patrols in the area? Because clearly a lot of people say they were quite frightened by what took place last night there.
Well, yeah, last night the police received a serious number of calls from a lot of people, of course, waking up to see fire in their street, helicopters up above. There is no current indication that there are going to be more events here later tonight, but the police have said that they will remain on patrol in the area. Of course, as the evening comes, we'll start to get a bigger picture of whether people do start to gather again here. At the place where the collision happened, there have been some flowers laid to, of course, mark the sad death of those 2 boys, which started essentially all of this off because of the rumours that spread off the back of it. But yeah, no indication currently that events are going to happen again tonight. But of course, as the day progresses, we'll update you when we get them.
Jack, for the moment, thank you very much. Back to you, of course, there in Cardiff for an update as we get more. But let's bring you some breaking news now, where a police disciplinary hearing has said that the former Metropolitan Police Officer Samantha Lee's dishonesty concerning her investigation into Wayne Couzens, of course, the convicted murderer police officer, over 2 incidents of flashing has amounted to gross misconduct. So that disciplinary hearing underway, and she allegedly missed opportunities to catch Cousins before he kidnapped, raped and murdered Sarah Everard. So more on that disciplinary hearing as we get it, but that now underway. The Duke of Sussex has lost his latest bid to bring a High Court challenge against the Home Office over his security arrangements when in the UK. It will now not go to a full hearing, Prince Harry having brought the challenge over a decision that he should not be allowed to pay privately for Home Office public protection when he's in the UK. Well, let's get the view now of royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams, who's joining us. Richard, he's been trying to have his day in court on several issues, and I think this was his second attempt on this particular issue.
What it is are two cases involving the Home Office. The first one deals with the fact that he's appealing the decision by Rebec, who control royal security, to lose his taxpayer-funded security and also his family, where after they stepped down as senior working royals, a decision was made in 2020. And so it is possible, were he to win that, he would win taxpayer-funded security. But this specific case was regarding his feeling as that he could actually pay for security, and the danger there, and I think it was always evident, it set a precedent. I mean, the argument, for example, that there are extra police at football matches. If there were extra police guarding individuals, that would mean that an individual would be able to pay, and an officer would presumably be putting his or her life in danger in their, in a way that would be considered curious and unacceptable, really, because only the rich could afford it.
Yeah, and it's brought into focus, of course, because he attended the coronation. We think there was a police royal protection bodyguard available because this was such a public occasion. But it does then question what sort of protection he will need or want when he comes for these other court cases to be heard in June next month.
Yes, absolutely. This is a series of court cases. There are 3 pending against different newspaper groups and also, of course, the one I mentioned against the Home Office. And the facts are that in June, when he appears, he will be the first royal, apart from Princess Anne, an issue dealing with the dogs in 2002, to appear in the witness box, the first senior royal, since the 1890s, whenever the 7th was Prince of Wales. Yes, exactly. When it comes to dealing with it as a case-by-case basis and what security he had coming to the coronation, I mean, this is one issue. The specific issue was that he felt that he had the right to pay, and it's been ruled that this won't go forward. Conceivably, however, he could, were he to win against the Home Office and the judge that he should, in fact, receive taxpayer-funded security, even though he isn't a senior working royal, nor is Meghan, that is another issue. So far as Sussex is concerned, of course, recently, and security is very high on their priority list, as we know, after the so-called, very controversial, extremely unpleasant, undoubtedly near catastrophic, I quote, car chase in New York recently, too.
Yeah, and of course the fact he was a serving officer in the army as well, and or Army Air Corps. So clearly there's that to come into consideration. Richard, for the moment, thank you for bringing us your reaction, of course, and as we say, more court cases to come. Coming up here on GB News Live, we'll have more reaction to news coming in that overseas students are to be banned from bringing their dependents to the UK. The government attempting to curb net migration, in fact, with those figures, of course, coming in tomorrow, or Thursday at least. First, though, an update on all the latest headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you. Here are the headlines at 1:32. Convicted paedophile Rolf Harris has died aged 93. The Australian-born artist and children's TV presenter was a family favourite for decades before he was convicted of 12 indecent assaults in 2014. His catalogue of abuse included an 8-year-old girl, 2 girls in their early teens and a friend of his daughter. Following his conviction, Harris was stripped of his CBE, which he received after painting the late Queen's 80th birthday portrait. Labour has accused the Prime Minister of dither and delay as he continues to consider whether to order an investigation into the Home Secretary's conduct. Suella Braverman is accused of breaching the ministerial code by asking civil servants to organise a private speed awareness course. She maintains nothing untoward took place, but the Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner says there are serious questions to be answered. Police in Portugal investigating the disappearance of Madeleine McCann are carrying out a targeted search of part of a reservoir not far from where she disappeared 16 years ago. Divers have been seen in the water after being advised by German authorities. The main suspect, Christian Bruckner, is facing sex offence charges in Germany and was in Portugal around the time Madeleine disappeared in 2007. South Wales Police have condemned violent scenes in Cardiff last night, which followed a crash in which 2 teenagers died. A clean-up operation is currently underway following the riot, in which police were pelted with missiles, including fireworks, and where 2 cars were set alight. Officers say the level of violence towards emergency services and the damage caused was totally unacceptable. Climate protesters have tried to storm the stage at Shell's annual general meeting. Security staff shielded Shell's chief executive as the protesters were carried away. Activists also caused disruption by singing and dancing, delaying the start of the meeting by more than an hour. This is GB News. You can get more on all of these stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2392 and €1.1496. The price of gold is £1,582 and 54 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 7,795 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back to GB News Live. A bit more breaking news coming through. We're being told overseas students, apart from postgraduates, that is, on research programmes, to be banned from bringing their dependents into the UK from January 2024. The government, of course, attempting to curb net migration. Well, the package has been announced ahead of figures due on Thursday, which are expected to show net migration running at record levels. It amounts, they say, to the single biggest tightening measure a government has ever done. Close quotes. Let's get more with our deputy political editor, Tom Harwood. And Tom, just to reiterate, they were expecting perhaps those figures on Thursday to be maybe 700,000 or even more. 970,000, I think, was the top estimate.
Yes, we've heard lots of numbers being bandied around. Of course, we do not know what those numbers are, and we will not know until Thursday. But there are expectations that it will be very high, perhaps the highest ever coming into the country for a number of reasons. Of course, we still have this British National Overseas Hong Kong visa that will be a considerable number. The Ukrainian refugee scheme, also a significant number. And, of course, some seasonal workers as well, with shortage occupation industry lists growing. But there are other routes as well. And one that the government is particularly concerned about is dependence of overseas undergraduate students. And many people raise an eyebrow at this in terms of if people are over here to study.
So someone comes to do a university course from Nigeria, whatever, and then once they're here, they bring in their family.
They have a right
on a specific visa that's attached to
exactly. If they're here on a student visa, they then have the right to bring over some family members. And people are particularly concerned about some of the lower-ranking universities that might not have the best job prospects and the like.
Or maybe if they're just on a year's course, for instance, as well.
Precisely, and putting down routes. But it's interesting how the government has presented this. It was sort of partially announced by Rishi Sunak in this cabinet readout this morning. Around the cabinet table, he was saying it in the context of the numbers this year. He expects this particular move to stop dependence of undergraduate students to be a considerable, to have a considerable impact on next year's numbers.
I've got a number here which I jotted down last week when the issue was being discussed. And this, again, is a specific visa on these students. This is a figure from December 2022. 135,788 of such visas being issued. So it is a substantial number.
It's more than the number who come as economic migrants for work. And to some extent, this does make us put the context of the figures into perhaps a different category, because when we think of perhaps 700,000 migrants, sometimes we might think these are all people coming for work. They're not. A lot of them are students, a lot of them are refugees, a lot of them fall into different categories under how we might describe them. Not all economic migration.
While you're here, we were discussing, of course, the Braverman continuing story a little earlier, and we were being told now, and of course there was cabinet, as you say, Rishi Sunak still mulling over, is the way it's described, whether or not to order the investigation into her conduct. Downing Street saying the Prime Minister's still looking at all the requisite information, i.e. the claims about whether she asked officials to help arrange a private speed awareness course rather than just asking for information about it. You know, was it specifically that she broke the code on that particular issue?
Right, and this is the fourth day now of this story where questions have been asked of number 10, and indeed it's only been a couple of days since the Prime Minister has asked Sir Laurie Magnus, the new ethics advisor, to look into to sort of explore around this subject. Not a formal investigation announced yet. We may well get an announcement of that later this week. That's just speculation, but there is considerable pressure. Of course, part of Angela Rayner's urgent question,
which we saw
this afternoon,
earlier,
which you saw at 12:30, 9:30 was focusing on this issue. Why hasn't the Prime Minister made a decision on whether or not to launch an investigation? Indeed, it is in the Prime Minister's gift to launch an investigation, no one else's. And indeed, we heard some criticism
Sir
of
Jeremy
the
Wright
system
from the backbenches,
in general. Sir Jeremy Wright, not always the strongest loyalist to his own party, raising the question, why can't the independent ethics advisor launch these investigations independently?
Yeah, and Jeremy Quinn saying thank you in a very staged way as a result of that particular intervention. Tom, thank you for that, and of course we'll keep an eye on that throughout the afternoon. But let's update you now on eco-protesters from the Fossil Free London group protesting at Shell's annual shareholder meeting in London today. Follows a bumpy year, of course, for the company, in which they made record profits of £32 billion. But at one stage, the protesters tried to storm the stage at the ExCeL Centre, one woman appearing to faint as she was then led away by security staff. Our reporter Ray Addison has the latest for us. And this is what he had to say.
As I speak, Mark, but a very difficult morning for Shell's senior executives here at their annual AGM. Security teams having to form a human chain in front of the CEO and the board of directors across that stage as climate protesters tried to unsuccessfly storm the stage and get access to those executives. Now, they were eventually removed from the hall. The start of the AGM itself, however, was delayed by an hour because of chanting and singing. Now, they moved us away from the outdoor protest, but there are cameras inside the AGM, and they captured the scenes.
Go to hell, Shell, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more. Go to hell, Shell, and don't you come back.
Now, because of all of that chanting, both inside and outside, there's also a lot of drumming going on as well. There has been disruption for people other than those Shell executives. They use the facilities here at the ExCeL Centre in London for A-level examinations, and I'm being told that they've had to move those students away to the very far end of the ExCeL Centre because of all the noise which was disrupting their exams. Now, of course, there's not just protests taking place here in East London, about 5.5 miles away from where I'm standing. In central London, there's been protests as well taking place by Just Stop Oil. For the last 5 weeks or so, they've been carrying out slow marches across London. This morning, during rush hour traffic, they were on 3 of London's bridges, including Blackfriars, where an incident occurred between one motorist who seemingly frustrated by being prevented from getting on with his day by these protesters, got out of his vehicle. A couple of protesters were pushed. One fell over and went to the ground, and we're seeing reports that motorist was actually arrested by police officers. Just Stop Oil actually posted a video on their social media saying this is an impossible situation, and asking the question, do we disrupt other ordinary people like this man arrested for lashing out today, or just sit back and watch everything burn? I've had thousands of responses to that tweet I've been reading through. Vast majority of people saying, we'd actually like you to stop, please.
Now, government borrowing growing to £25.6 billion last month, according to the latest official figures, far higher than the £17.9 billion economists had been predicting. Indeed, the second highest April borrowing figure on record. Well, the cost of the energy support scheme, higher benefits and rising debt interest, all adding to the bill. But when addressing the International Monetary Fund a little earlier, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt remaining confident that the UK economy was en route to growth, as he said.
Today, the IMF's assessment shows that we are on the right track. Their report forecasts growth of 0.4% in 2023, a 0.7 percentage point upgrade versus the April forecast. That's even higher than the Bank of England's forecast published last week for 0.25% growth in 23. The IMF also say we've acted decisively to fight inflation, which will substantially reduce to around 5% by the end of the year.
Well, he didn't seem very excited by it. However, let's see what our economics and business editor Liam Halligan makes of it in On the Money. Big figures, and as we say, I mean, economists predicting, 17.9 billion. It's gone way north of that.
Jeremy Hunt there was desperate not to talk about these borrowing numbers, and he was desperate to talk about the fact that the IMF has now upgraded UK growth forecast.
No recession.
So we are now no longer the slowest growing economy in the G7 this year, according to the International Monetary Fund. Pretty astonishing, Mark. You know, just a month ago, they were saying the UK economy would shrink by 0.3% this year, and now they're saying it will grow by almost 0.5%. Blimey. But let's talk about these borrowing numbers, because they are pretty interesting when you think about them. Here you go. In April 2023, the UK government borrowed £25.6 billion. That's £25,000 million in 1 month, and it's almost double the April 2022 number of 13.7 million. Now, that extra borrowing in that month, that adds to the total debt, which is now £2.5 trillion. I mean, mad numbers. But what does it mean in terms of the interest that the government has to pay on that massive debt? In April last month, the government paid £9.8 billion of debt interest in a single month. You could spend that on cutting the headline rate of income tax by 2p, or you could spend it, a single month's interest payments, on 20 hospitals. You could build 20 hospitals. Yeah. And so I put it to you, Mark. A lot of people in the media, a lot of people in the political class, they say, oh, why doesn't the government just borrow and spend more money? They must be heartless. Surely they can spend more money. Well, when you do borrow and spend lots of money, you end up paying £10 billion in a single month. We're now paying, Mark, if you add up all the debt interest we're going to pay in this year, it's going to be more than 100 billion, right? Which is bigger than the education budget.
Yeah, and this effectively is dead money, if you like. And, of course, just like, you know, everyone with a mortgage is going to have to pay more money as interest rates climb, so the government has to do that as well. As the interest
but at least when you buy a mortgage, you have a mortgage, you're living in the house, right? It's providing a service. And also, hopefully at the end of it, if you can weather the mortgage, you have an asset that's valuable. Yeah. Now, some people would say, but of course the government's got to borrow and spend money. Yes, it has. But to this extent, it really worries me when we're spending £10 billion a month on debt interest.
Now, Jeremy Hunt has said, yes, it is too high now, but if we stick to our plan to get the economy growing, then debt is set to fall. But, of course, that begs the question, OK, where's the growth going to come from and when's it going to happen? Because, I mean, there's another indication, I think, in the private sector that we talk about, the PMI index showing growth. Now, it's still above 50, which is good, but it's gone down again in May from April. Economists expecting it to come in at 54.7. It's actually at 53.9, indicating that, you know, things are slowed down again.
Things are slowing down, but the economy does remain pretty resilient. Obviously, there are parts of the country where there's a lot less growth, that are a lot more depressed. We desperately need to address regional inequality in this country, but the economy as a whole is bearing up quite well. A problem that a lot of people in business have, Mark, is that when you're borrowing, you know, 25 billion quid in a single month, when you're paying £10 billion of debt interest on the entire debt, you have to tax a lot. And taxation is high. Taxation is at a 70-year high. And this is the ultimate conundrum of economics. Do you lower taxes to get growth going, so then your debt is lower as a share of your economy? Or when you've got lots of debt, do you need to raise taxes in order to pay the interest? I think the former works better, but it seems for now at least the Prime Minister and the Chancellor don't agree.
Right, OK. Should we go to Scarborough and cheer ourselves up? Because Toulson Court in Scarborough has been named the world's best B&B by TripAdvisor for the third year running, with more than 2,000 excellent reviews on that site. Well, our Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley has been to proud owners James and Angela Rusden.
I'm here with James and Angela at the Toulson Court B&B in Scarborough, which has just won for the third time in a row the best B&B in the world, according to TripAdvisor. How are you both feeling about this amazing achievement?
It is just amazing. I mean, it's unbelievable almost. I think we won it first time, we didn't sort of believe it was true. We thought actually somebody was playing a prank on us. And then second time was just like, wow. And then nobody had ever won it third time. So we sort of decided last year, should we try this year to try and get it 3 times? Because nobody's ever done it 3 times. But we're just over the moon. I mean, what an achievement. What an achievement for just an ordinary bed and breakfast in Scarborough. We're not the Ritz, we're not the Savoy. We haven't got roaring fires. We haven't got views of wildebeest and stuff running outside. We are just an ordinary everyday B&B in Scarborough.
And what do you think it is that keeps bringing people back?
There's just so much to do in Scarborough. I mean, our behalf, they obviously come here, they stay here, they enjoy what we have to offer in the rooms, comfort-wise, comfy bed, nice and clean environment, a good breakfast. They get slightly entertained by me in the morning if they like that type of thing with the singing chef. But it's down to like the way that we work together and interact with the guests, that they feel like it's coming home. They think like they're visiting family and close family, because we are close to them, and they then recommend us to their friends and family, and that's how our business is turning over with repeat business. But Scarborough does have on the outside so much to offer. The age you're on the day, there's so much to do and free stuff to do, like your walks in Peazone Park, and you can go to Bridlington, you can go to Dolby Forest, you can go to Filey, Whitby, are all within close striking distance. And as well as that, on an evening, there's many nice places to eat, many things to do with the entertainment-wise, from the open-air theatre to the spa, to the YMCA and Stephen Joseph Theatre. There's also lots of bands and people playing out in the pubs and clubs, which keep people entertained, and it makes you happy on an evening. You go out and you come back, have a nice meal, and you come back and you're sort of holiday mode because you've had that entertainment.
And with the rising cost of living, how important is it getting awards like this and getting recognised?
It's really important that people know that there are still nice holiday places to come to that aren't going to cost you the earth. So because the price of everything's going up, we've tried to keep our prices really competitive, especially being as we've got so many repeat customers. We want to keep them happy.
Definitely. It sounds like you're doing a fantastic job, and thank you both for speaking to us. That's Tulson Court B&B in Scarborough. If you're in the area, certainly give it a visit. Such an amazing award-winning B&B, and who knows, maybe next year, 4th year in a row for the world's best B&B.
No pressure there. And thumbs up for Scarborough. Coming up in this next hour on GB News Live, back to Portugal Live as the hunt continues for missing Madeleine McCann. Indications 20 officers now digging up the side of the reservoir there. Latest coming up with Mark White at the scene. Stay with us.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Dry and bright for most of us today, but cloudier skies at times compared with the last couple of days, I think, especially in the south. And in the north, the thick cloud could bring some drizzle at times for the far north of Scotland. That's where some weak weather fronts are still tending to brush close to, but they're toppling over an area of high pressure. That high pressure keeping things generally settled for the foreseeable, really for the next week, 2 weeks, perhaps more. Now, there is some cloud out there, and a bit more of it compared with the last few days, so not entirely sunny, and the cloud perhaps giving the odd light shower through the Midlands into southeast Wales. For most, it's dry, it's fine, it's bright. Temperatures not quite as high as Monday, but still 20, 21 Celsius in the south, mid to high teens further north. For Scotland, an area of drizzle passing through northern parts, and then the breeze picks up later in the day across the Northern Isles into the Northwest Highlands and the Western Isles, and later on another band of patchy rain and drizzle pushes south into the far north. Otherwise, clearing skies elsewhere, and as a result, temperatures dipping into the single figures. So a fresh start to Wednesday. Plenty of sunshine, though, for England, Wales, eastern Scotland. A lot more compared with today, I think. And we keep those sunnier skies throughout much of Wednesday. And as a result, it will be a warmer day once again. I think the breeze off the North Sea will keep things, again, cooler for the east coast. But inland, 21, 22... 23 or even 24 Celsius in one or two spots. Scotland and Northern Ireland mostly dry and bright, but an area of cloud and light showers will push through central Scotland during the afternoon. That will tend to disappear into Northern Ireland and then the Irish Sea by the evening. Clearing skies then for Scotland overnight, and with clear spells further south as well. It's going to be another fresh start to Thursday, a chilly start for Scotland, but plenty of sunshine to come on Thursday and another warm day.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 2 o'clock. Very good afternoon. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up this Tuesday afternoon, convicted paedophile Rolf Harris dies at the age of 93, said to have been suffering from neck cancer. He'd been released from jail after convictions for indecent assault. He's one of the biggest stars of TV family entertainment from the 60s onwards. Police in Portugal appear to be acting on specific intelligence in their continuing search for Madeleine McCann at this reservoir, concentrating their efforts on one area of water. Our security editor Mark White there, live for us at the scene. And Suella Braverman announcing a fresh clampdown on migration, with foreign students no longer able to bring their families with them unless they're postgraduates. Figures due on Thursday expected to show net migration at its record highest level. Also coming up, we'll be telling you how Jeremy Hunt's overdraft has reached £25.6 billion. But will it be us paying the bill? First, the latest headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you, and good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 2:01. Well, let's just start with this breaking news this hour. A former Met Police officer accused of failing to properly investigate Wayne Couzens over flashing incidents has been found guilty of gross misconduct. Samantha Lee was tasked to conduct an inquiry into the incidents in 2021. Couzens exposed himself to female members of staff at a restaurant in Kent in the weeks before Miss Everard's death. Lee was found to be dishonest, claiming the CCTV at the restaurant was deleted automatically. Convicted paedophile Rolf Harris has died, aged 93. The Australian-born artist and children's TV presenter was a family favourite for decades before he was convicted of 12 indecent assaults in 2014. His catalogue of abuse included an 8-year-old, 2 girls in their early teens and a friend of his daughter. Following his conviction, Harris was stripped of his CBE, which he received after painting the late Queen's 80th birthday portrait. Labour has accused the Prime Minister of dither and delay as he continues to consider whether to order an investigation into the Home Secretary's conduct. Suella Braverman is accused of breaching the ministerial code by asking civil servants to organise a private speed awareness course. She maintains nothing untoward took place, but the Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner says there are serious questions to be answered.
As ministers know, the Home Secretary has already admitted to breaching the ministerial code by using personal emails to share sensitive government information. So I ask the Minister today, how many strikes before she's out?
Paymaster General Jeremy Quinn says the Prime Minister is taking time to gather the facts.
The Prime Minister has met both the independent adviser and the Home Secretary and asked for further information. It is right that the Prime Minister, as the head of the executive and the arbiter of the ministerial code, be allowed time to receive relevant information on this matter.
Police investigating the disappearance of Madeleine McCann say they are searching part of a reservoir in Portugal, not far from where she disappeared 16 years ago after receiving a tip-off. Divers have been seen in the water after being advised by the German authorities. The main suspect, Christian Bruckner, is facing sex offence charges in Germany and was in Portugal around the time Madeleine disappeared in 2007. 2 teenagers who died in a crash in Cardiff has been named locally as Crease Sullivan, who was 16, and 15-year-old Harvey Evans. There was violent unrest in the wake of the fatal crash, in which police were pelted with missiles, including fireworks, and 2 cars were set on fire. Friends of the boys say they were riding an electric scooter without helmets when they died. Some residents claimed they were being chased by police at the time, but this has been denied by South Wales Police. Overseas students will be banned from bringing dependents to the UK from next January. The ban, which attempts to bring down migration, won't include the students in postgraduate research programmes. International students will also not be able to switch out of the student route to work before completing their studies. The International Monetary Fund says it's not expecting the UK to enter into a recession this year. It says the growth remains subdued, forecasting growth of 0.4% this year. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says the report credits the government's action to restore stability and tame inflation.
The IMF also say we've acted decisively to fight inflation, which will substantially reduce to around 5% by the end of the year. And the IMF say that our approach to fiscal policy will help to significantly reduce the deficit over the forecast by 3% of GDP between 22-23 and 27-28. So together these forecasts demonstrate that we're on the right path, but the job is not done yet.
The Duke of Sussex has lost his bid to legally challenge the Home Office's decision to block him from paying for police protection whilst he's in the UK. Prince Harry had wanted to foot the bill himself after being told he would no longer receive the same degree of protection as a working royal when visiting the country. The decision comes a week after Harry and Meghan say they were chased through New York at high speed by paparazzi. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Well, welcome back to GB News Live. And as we're hearing official confirmation now that the disgraced entertainer and convicted paedophile Rolf Harris has died at the age of 93. You remember the Australian-born entertainer jailed for 5 years and 9 months back in 2014 after being convicted of 12 indecent assaults against young girls between 1968 in 1986. Reportedly, he'd been very sick with neck cancer since leaving prison in 2017, being fed through a tube in the latter stages of his life. Well, let's get more now with Ellie Costello, who's able to update us in the studio. And Ellie, this confirmation coming via press association, but Maidenhead Town Hall, of all places, releasing the information.
Yes, Mark, we have this official confirmation now that the disgraced entertainer and convicted paedophile Rolf Harris has died aged 93. It has come from a registrar at Maidenhead Town Hall, just simply to confirm that he had died. And in the last few moments, we have had a family statement subsequently from the Harris family. It says, this is to confirm that Rolf Harris recently died, peacefully surrounded by his family and friends, and has now been laid to rest. They ask that you respect their privacy. No further comment will be made. And what is so interesting about that statement, Mark, is the fact that he has been laid to rest.
Yeah.
You might remember a couple of weeks ago, around May the 11th, there were photos in several of the newspapers of a private ambulance outside Rolf Harris's home in Bray in Berkshire, and there were whispers then that he was in very ill health. There had been reports that he'd been suffering with lung cancer, and that statement from the family would suggest that he could have passed away as long ago as 2 weeks ago. And the reason that we're hearing about it today is that the death has now been registered with Windsor and Maidenhead Council.
So the official announcement coming from that local authority. And of course, we reflect that after leaving the open or the prison where he was, he became effectively a near recluse at this mansion on the riverside at Bray, and his wife being cared for as well at the time because she was suffering from Alzheimer's. So clearly, you know, the situation for... Well, he's one of the biggest stars, of course, of the 1960s and 70s. After this disgrace in court, he was basically living on his own with his wife in these circumstances.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, he did live as a recluse, really, for the last 6 years of his life since leaving prison. His wife, who is now 91 years old, who is suffering with Alzheimer's, believed to be also receiving round-the-clock care, stayed with him in that home in Bray. But yes, Mark, he was a national treasure. He was right at the heart of the British establishment. You will remember, as most people do, he famously painted that portrait of the late Queen Elizabeth II, very much at the heart of the British establishment. He was adored by children, wasn't he? And his work...
the cartoon series, and he was actually a very talented artist. But, I mean, we reflect on what the judge said when he was sentencing him, Mr Justice Sweeney. Your reputation lies in ruins. You've been stripped of your honours. You have no one to blame but yourself. I mean, he was formerly cleared of other unconnected historical sex offences, but, you know, 12 indecent assault convictions between 1968 and 1986. And, of course, this was part of Operation U-Tree, we remember. Was Saville, who was the first one that the police got to, and then it was Harris.
Yes, so he was the second person that was convicted in that operation. It was into this historical sex abuse allegations of high-profile figures. So he was arrested in 2013. The next year, he was sentenced to 5 years and 9 months in jail. And this was for 12 assaults against 4 girls and 4 charges of producing indecent child images. And it totally wrecked his career and ruined his reputation. He never admitted to his crimes.
No.
He always said that he was innocent. Obviously, being found guilty of those crimes would say otherwise. But the judge even remarked that he showed no remorse in court.
Absolutely.
He described him as a Jekyll and Hyde character. And I'm sure many people in the British public would agree with that, in the sense that he was totally adored by children. He was at the heart of British living rooms on the television. And all of this dark criminality was going on in the shadows.
This is what was so disturbing, wasn't it? That, you know, he was actually, as Saville, of course, with Jim Will Fix It, so connected to young children and young teenagers in terms of his place in the entertainment sort of world, that this was all going on behind the scenes.
It adds even more to that feeling of disgust, doesn't it? That sense of betrayal, that these horrific crimes were being perpetrated against children, whilst at the same time he was this much-loved children's entertainer.
Ellie, thank you for taking us through that. But as we say, confirmation that he's died now at the age of 93. Now, the German prosecutor leading the Madeleine McCann investigation said a major search underway at this reservoir in the Algarve in Portugal because of a tip-off. Officers from the UK joining German officers and Portuguese search teams in this huge operation underway as we speak. The Metropolitan Police say they're there so they can inform Madeleine's family if there are any developments. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, is also at the scene and sent this latest report.
At the edge of the Arad Reservoir, a fire and rescue service, rigid inflatable, was visible at first light, testing the waters for the dive teams who'll spend the next few days in a targeted search of this area. Throughout the morning, dozens of police and other officials arrived at this makeshift staging area for briefings inside these blue tents before being deployed to their search grids. 16 years on from the disappearance of Madeleine McCann in the resort of Praia da Luz, there is still no concrete evidence of what happened to the 3-year-old. But both Portuguese and German police are convinced convicted sex offender Christian Bruckner is the man responsible for her abduction. He's currently serving 7 years in a German prison for the rape of an American tourist in Praia da Luz 2 years before Madeleine's disappearance. About half a mile from the staging area, another group of tents are visible in woodland just back from the shoreline. It was the German authorities who requested this latest search. It's reported that Christian Bruckner used to visit this area around the dam on a regular basis. It's a spot that he was apparently particularly fond of. In fact, he lived just about 7 miles from here for a while in a commune, and Praia da Luz itself is only some 20 miles further down the road. The German authorities have not yet said what's brought them to this area, miles from anywhere. But it is the first major search operation in the Algarve for almost a decade, since the Metropolitan Police asked for a series of digs around the Praia da Luz area in 2014. A small group of Scotland Yard detectives are out here this week as official observers. Of course, there is always intense public interest anytime there are developments in this more than a decade-and-a-half long mystery. Madeleine McCann's parents, who've seen many false dawns in this protracted investigation, are being kept informed about the progress of this latest search. Mark White, GB News, at the Arad Dam on the Algarve.
Well, let's get the very latest now with Mark, who can update us live there from the scene. And Mark, clearly people would draw the fact that we're at this reservoir. We've seen this rigid inflatable and the divers, that the search is focusing on the water. But we've seen a lot of activity on the shorelines as well.
Yes, indeed, the majority of the operation, in fact, all of the operation really today is on shore. There was a fire and rescue service, rigid inflatable. It was being tested on the water earlier. It's done a couple of circuits around the reservoir, but there's no divers, as we understand, in the water at this stage. That may well come in the coming days, but their activity for the time being is concentrated on a peninsula behind us. It's in the west end of the reservoir here, and they are using probes, they're using ground penetrating radar to get a proper look at what is under the ground here. And they've been helped in a way, Mark, by the fact that we've had not a lot of rainfall in recent months in this area, and actually the water level in the reservoir is some 15 to 20 feet lower than it would normally be. So that's enabling the search teams just to penetrate a bit deeper down onto the shoreline as well. But it's clear they're acting, we'd said this earlier on, that they've been acting on specific intelligence, and indeed we've been hearing from Christian Wolters, who's the chief prosecutor in Germany handling the Madeleine McCann investigation, and of course the inquiry into their prime suspect, Christian Bruckner, who is actually in prison in Germany on sex offences. They were convinced that he abducted Madeleine McCann and then murdered Madeleine McCann, according to the German authorities. They believe that they have got significant evidence pointing to that fact. They have never made that public. But Christian Volkers has said today that it was a tip-off information that they received that has taken them to this very specific location, which effectively is in the middle of nowhere, Mark.
Yeah, and therefore, obviously, an indication as to why this might be so significant. Now, this is a joint operation with these Portuguese officers undertaking the physical search, overseen by the Germans, but also we've got the Met Police involved in this. Just explain to us why they're there as well.
Well, of course, there is a British-led inquiry as well, an investigation that has been underway since 2011, since the parents of Madeleine McCann, Jerry and Kate McCann, successfully lobbied the British government for the Metropolitan Police to open an investigation. They were not happy with the original Portuguese investigation, so that was opened some 4 years after Madeleine disappeared, and has been running ever since. And now, of course, in tandem with the Portuguese inquiry that's still open, really, and of course the German inquiry that's very much in an active phase. And we heard from Detective Chief Inspector Mark Cranwell just a short time ago in a statement from Scotland Yard, thanking the German and Portuguese authorities for allowing some of his detectives over to the Algarve. They're here at the moment in a monitoring capacity, effectively keeping an eye on what's happening, liaising with their German and Portuguese counterparts, and feeding key information of note back to Kate and Jerry McCann on the progress of this particular investigation.
And just quickly then, Mark, given the area they've got to cover, do we know how long this is likely to continue for?
I think it will depend on what they really find in the next couple of days, because I think it's clear the information, as confirmed by the Chief Prosecutor Christian Volkers, is acting on specific intelligence. So if they find anything that suggests that intelligence actually is correct, that there is some evidence related to the disappearance of Madeleine McCann here, then it will be, I'm sure, a much more intensive search. It's already significant as it is. And the area, we should say, is important in the sense that we know that that prime suspect, Christian Bruckner, was also someone, was also someone who had frequented this area. And Bruckner, in his time, lived about 7 miles in a commune for a while, not far from the reservoir, and apparently told people that this was one of his favourite places. Reports that actually photographic evidence linking him to this area that they're searching now was found, and that may be one of the instigators of the police search.
Mark, in Portugal, thank you very much indeed for updating us there, and of course back to you as we get more. Now let's just update you here on GB News that we'll be going shortly, hopefully to Newcastle Crown Court for the sentencing, which is underway, and we think that will be televised as well in terms of David Boyd and the murder of that girl all those years ago, some 30 years ago, 1993 trial originally, but Nikki's mother, Sharon Henderson, has been speaking to the court earlier, saying that she wanted to see justice done for her daughter, Nikki. I think, in fact, we can actually join that sentencing now. Just a warning that you may find some of the content being discussed distressing. Let's take you to the court.
Exchange building. Inside, the building was pitch black. The windows were boarded up, save for one missing board, leaving a gap through which Nikki had been pushed, but in any event, it was late in the evening of an October night. Once inside, Nikki must have been petrified. It would not have taken the 7-year-old long to appreciate that she was trapped in that cold and dark building and that you were coming through the window to get her. The forensic scientist told the jury that the site of the fatal assault was as far away from the window as Nikki could have got on that ground floor, that is, the far wall of the furthest room. No doubt this is where she ran, in order to get as far away as possible from you. Her fear, as she saw you lurching towards her in the dark, is unimaginable. You found her standing or sitting against that far wall. It was there that you struck her head at least twice with a brick, fracturing her skull into several pieces. Although not necessarily immediately fatal, those blows to the head are likely to have rendered Nikki unconscious. You then stabbed her naked chest and upper body with a knife which you had brought with you. It was a frenzied attack during which you stabbed her 37 times. Many of the stabs were inflicted through the same stab wound. The knife was described by the pathologist, Dr. Cooper, as having a tapering blade of around 10 centimetres long. You pushed the blade into her chest and organs to its fullest extent, so that her body bore the marks of the hilt of the knife. Having killed her, you then dragged Nikki Allen by her ankles down the staircase into the cellar of the old Exchange building, her head bouncing from stair to stair, leaving traces of blood and fibres on the risers. You dragged her into the far corner of the furthest room and left her, no doubt hoping that her body would remain undiscovered. Your hope that Nikki would not be discovered did not take into account the extent of the concern that Nikki's disappearance provoked in the tight-knit community of the Garths, that complex of tenement flats where Nikki and her family lived. A large number of Nikki's family, friends and neighbours set about searching for her. Nikki's body was discovered in the basement of the old Exchange building only the next morning by a local teenager. In the police investigation which followed the murder, you were interviewed by police officers conducting house-to-house inquiries. You later gave a witness statement in which you said that you had seen Nikki playing in Weir Garth earlier that evening. You told the police that you'd been out getting fish and chips between 9:30 and 10 p.m. that evening, so giving yourself a neat but wholly false alibi for the time of the murder. In 1993, an innocent man, George Heron, was tried and acquitted of Nikki Allen's murder at Leeds Crown Court. As the years passed by and you got on with your life, you must have thought often about Nikki's murder. You must have thought, no doubt, with some satisfaction and some relief, that you'd got away with it. However, the science of DNA analysis was advancing. New developments led the police to identify traces of YSTR DNA, which matched your profile on the T-shirt and leggings that Nikki was wearing on the night she was murdered. Whilst not as specific as autosomal DNA, the YSTR DNA profile was nonetheless discriminating. Mr. Chapman, the forensic scientist who gave evidence before this jury, accepted that the YSTR DNA profile found on Nikki's clothing was not necessarily unique to you. It would have been shared by any male relative of yours, but the police investigation effectively ruled out the possibility of another male relative being in the Sunderland area in October of 1992. Mr. Chapman also accepted that your YSTR profile might be shared coincidentally by other males. The chances of that coincidental sharing may have been in the order of around 1 to 28,000. But the jury had to consider what chance there was of an unrelated man coincidentally sharing your YSTR DNA profile, living within your local community, knowing Nikki Allen sufficiently well to be able to lure her away from the Garth, and who also knew the old Exchange building so well that they were able to navigate their way round in the dark. The DNA evidence was powerful evidence against you. A review of other witness evidence demonstrated inconsistencies in the accounts which you had given the police and showed that your alibi, which you'd given yourself in your police statement, must have been false. This led to your arrest and charge. The discovery of Nikki's dead body and the long search for her killer has shocked and bewildered this community for the past 31 years. The long search for Nikki Allen's killer culminated in your conviction for the murder of her on the 12th of May of 2023. Nikki Allen was loved. She was loved by her mother, whose moving statement of loss and sadness has been read to the court this morning by Mr. Wright, King's Counsel. She was loved by her father, whose life was changed by the events of the 7th of October of 1992. She has left a hole in her family and in the community in which she lived. I now sentence you for her murder. There is only one sentence which I can impose for the crime of murder, and that is one of life imprisonment. I must, however, go on to consider whether to make a whole life order or to make a minimum term order. That is, a minimum term which you must serve before consideration is given by the parole board to your release. I must have regard to the general principles set out in Schedule 21 of the Sentencing Act 2020 when deciding whether to impose a whole life term or when fixing the minimum term which you must serve. Your offence was committed before the 18th of December 2003. This makes a significant difference to the approach which I must take to sentence. Paragraph 12 to the Schedule 21 of the Sentencing Act 2020 requires me to have regard to, and indeed to apply, the practice which would have been followed by the Secretary of State before 2002 in respect of the term to be served in prison. The law prevents me from making an order which is greater than that which would have been imposed had you been convicted before December 2003. This principle, which I must follow, should be clearly understood. I emphasise it at this stage because, as will become apparent, minimum terms to be served before consideration is given to release on licence, were in the 1990s and the early 2000s much shorter than would have been ordered today in 2023. In deciding whether to impose a minimum term, and if so, the length of that term before any release on licence, I'm required to adopt the following approach. First, to assess the term to be served by reference to contemporary principles set out in Schedule 21 of the Sentencing Act 2020. I must then identify the length of that minimum term before any release on licence, as would have been determined by the Secretary of State before 2002, by applying the relevant practice directions and other guidance available. If the minimum term to be served would have been shorter before December 2002, then I must apply that shorter term. Relevant findings of fact. I start, therefore, by considering the appropriate term which you must serve by reference to Schedule 21 of the Sentencing Act. In this context, I make the following findings of which I am sure, having been the trial judge. You lured Nikki Allen away from the relative safety of the Garths by telling her lies. Only you know what you said to her to cause her to leave the Garths with you shortly before 10 p.m. on the 7th of October 1992, but somehow you tricked her into going with you in the opposite direction to her home and on a cold and dark night. You did not use force. A witness saw you both on your way to the old Exchange building, you leading the way and Nikki skipping along after you. The impression of that witness was that you were father and daughter. You didn't need to use force, because Nikki knew you and she trusted you. The jury heard evidence that Nikki was shy and clingy to her mother, not a child who would have been inclined to go off with a stranger. But you knew Nikki's family and they knew you. Your purpose in luring Nikki away to the old Exchange building was sexual. You intended to sexually assault Nikki either in the grounds of the old Exchange building or in the building itself. You were aged 25 at the time. Nikki was 7 years old. There could have been no benign reason for your wishing to trick Nikki into going with you to an isolated derelict building. Using common sense, there could be no other reason for you luring her away as you did for anything other than a sexual reason. My confidence in this conclusion is fortified by my knowledge of your history of convictions for offences of indecency towards children of Nikki's age, and by your admission to the probation worker in March of 2000 that in your early 20s you were sexually interested in children of Nikki's age. Nikki did not submit to the sexual assault or attempted sexual assault. She must have resisted. And during the struggle, her anorak and shoes came off. She screamed and you struck her to silence her. You murdered her, intending to kill her, in order that she would not tell anyone about what you had done or had tried to do to her. You pushed her into the deserted and derelict building and then went in after her. Having struck Nikki over the head at least twice with a brick fracturing her skull, you then stabbed her chest with a knife, either a kitchen knife or a penknife, which you had taken with you. Your attack was brutal. You stabbed Nikki's chest and abdomen on 37 occasions. The stab wounds were deep, many penetrating more than one internal organ. The T-shirt which Nikki was wearing bore no holes, indicating that the T-shirt had been raised above her abdomen when you stabbed her. I cannot be sure that you deliberately and intentionally raised her top, rather than it having become rucked up under her armpits during the struggle. I'm not therefore sure that the act of stabbing Nikki's naked chest had an overtly sexual element to it. You caused Nikki great mental suffering in the minutes before her loss of consciousness. After you pushed her into the old Exchange building, she must have quickly known that you were coming after her to hurt her, and there was nowhere for her to hide. She was in a cold, pitch-black building. Her terror at what was to befall her as you stalked her in that building is unimaginable. You then took steps to conceal what you'd done. You did your best to hide Nikki's body by dragging her down into the dark cellar, where you dumped her in the far corner of the room furthest away from the staircase. No one would have been likely to have found her body had they not been looking for it in the cellar with a decent torch. You then covered yourself by giving false information to the police. You provided yourself with a neat but false alibi, claiming to have been away from the Garths, getting fish and chips for a friend at the time when Nikki was killed. You are now 55 years old when you committed this.
This is the sentencing at Newcastle Crown Court with indications that sex offender David Boyd had a sinister purpose when he lured 7-year-old Nikki Allen away to this derelict warehouse before murdering her. The judge explaining the parameters of what she has to decide now in sentencing, which will be taking place shortly. We'll stay with us at Newcastle Crown Court.
Between 8 and 10 years old. You took hold of one girl by the arm and asked to kiss her. You told the children not to tell anyone. In March 2000, so 8 years after your killing of Nikki Allen, you were convicted of an indecent assault upon a female under 14 years. 2 girls, aged 9 and 12, were playing in a park. You approached the girls and took hold of the shoulder of one of them. You told her not to scream. You asked the other whether she had knickers on. You then took hold of the front of her clothing, placed your hand between her legs, touching her vagina over her clothing. In connection with this offence, you were interviewed by a probation officer when you admitted that when you had been approximately 22 years old or thereabouts, you had started to fantasise about both adults and children, in particular young girls. You told her that you would think about young girls being naked and what it would be like to touch their body and have sexual intercourse with them. It's against this background that I address the first issue which I must consider under Schedule 21 of the Sentencing Act 2020. And that concerns whether to impose a whole life order. Paragraph 2 of Schedule 21 provides for a starting point of a whole life term in cases of exceptionally high seriousness. Paragraph 2.2 provides that cases which would normally fall within this category of exceptionally high seriousness include at B, the murder of a child if it involves the abduction of the child or it involves sexual motivation. In this case, the Crown does not submit that Nikki was abducted by force. As I've said, she was seen by witnesses apparently skipping behind you in order to catch you up. But undoubtedly you tricked Nikki by lying to her about something or other. You took advantage of her young age and her naivety, and of the fact that she knew you and trusted you as a friend of the family. I agree with Mr. Wright that even though no physical abduction took place, your use of deception to lure Nikki to the old Exchange building approximates to the abduction scenario. The killing did not involve sexual motivation. I find no evidence that you were sexually thrilled by the killing. But the whole purpose of your tricking Nikki to go to the derelict building was, as I have found, in order to assault her sexually. The presence of these factors in conjunction with other factors which I've identified in my findings of fact have caused me to reflect very carefully upon whether this is one of those exceptional cases in which a whole life order should be imposed. Mr. Wright does not urge that course upon me, and on reflection, rightly so. Recent guidance from the Court of Appeal reminds judges that whole life orders should be imposed only where the facts of the case, considered as a whole, will leave the judge in no doubt that the offender must be kept in prison for the rest of his or her life. It's a sentence of last resort for cases of the most extreme gravity, and one reserved for a few exceptionally serious cases. Given this perspective, whilst undoubtedly a murder which will horrify all those who hear or read about it, I'm not able to come to the sure and confident conclusion that the imposition of a whole life term for the murder of Nikki Allen is appropriate. I am, however, wholly satisfied that the murder of Nikki Allen was one of particularly high seriousness, as envisaged by paragraph 3 of Schedule 21, and the correct starting point for the minimum term to be served is one of 30 years. Paragraph 3 of Schedule 21 sets out a list of features which, if present, would normally lead to the conclusion that the murder falls into the category of particularly high seriousness. It's a non-exhaustive list of examples only. The real question for me is whether, reflecting on the types of conduct referred to in those statutory examples, I am satisfied that there exist features of your murder of Nikki Allen which justify that description of Nikki's murder as one of particularly high seriousness. And I am entirely satisfied that those features do exist. I've already stated my conclusion that whilst you didn't physically abduct Nikki, what you did by tricking a trusting 7-year-old girl into going with you was very close to such a scenario. That factor, it seems to me, is one that I can and must take into account when considering the seriousness of the murder. I also take into account that your purpose in luring Nikki away from the Garths was to sexually assault her, and that this is what you did, or at least tried to do, when in the scrubland around the building. One of the examples of factors which would normally justify the inclusion of the murder within the classification of particular seriousness is that the murder involved sexual conduct. That, I find, was not present in this case. I can't be sure that you deliberately lifted Nikki's t-shirt up so as to expose her chest, and or that there was sexual conduct involved in the killing itself. However, the facts of Nikki's murder come very close indeed to involving sexual conduct, and that your purpose in luring her away was sexual, and I have found that you did sexually assault her, or at least attempt to do so outside the building. Again, this, it seems to me, is a factor which I can and must take into account when considering the starting point for the minimum term which you should serve. Finally, I take into account your purpose in killing Nikki, to prevent her telling anyone what you'd done. This does not come within the description of a murder to obstruct or interfere with the course of justice, as stated in paragraph 3.2. No course of justice had been set in motion by the time you killed Nikki. But nonetheless, it appears to me that the purpose of your killing Nikki is a factor which I can take into account, albeit to a very modest degree, when considering the starting point for the minimum term. The presence, therefore, of these three features drive me to the inescapable conclusion that your murder of Nikki Allen must be categorised as one of particular seriousness. Each of the features which I have identified approximate to various statutory examples in paragraph 3.2. Mr. Pitter urges me not to reach this conclusion on the basis that I can't be sure that the murder bears any of the features which are mentioned in paragraph 3.2, but he poses the wrong question of the court. The question is not whether the facts of any murder can be shoehorned into one of the examples in paragraph 3.2, but whether, taking the range of examples into account, the court can be sure that the murder is one properly described as of particular seriousness. From that starting point of 30 years, I then consider the aggravating factors. There are many. Mr. Pitter urges me to avoid the double counting of these aggravating factors, and I agree with the need for caution in this regard. I accept, just by way of example, that the use of two weapons overlaps with the vicious nature of your attack upon Nikki. However, viewed cumulatively and guarding against double counting, the aggravating factors justify a very significant increase from the starting point of 30 years. The aggravating factors are as follows. The mental and physical suffering which Nikki Allen experienced before you kill her. This bears repetition. I take into account here that period of mental suffering which she must have experienced after you had pushed her into the derelict building. She must have quickly known that she was trapped. She must have quickly known that you were coming after her to hurt her. It was cold and dark. I can't be sure of the time which you took to stalk her in that building. It may have been a short time only, but however long it was, it must have been a truly terrifying experience for this 7-year-old girl. I also take into account here what happened outside the building before you pushed her inside it. There was clearly some sort of struggle after your assault or attempted assault, and one which Nikki was bound to lose. And I don't underestimate how frightening this experience must have been for her. A further aggravating factor is your use of two weapons, a brick and a knife, which you took to the scene. In addressing me on the application of Schedule 21, Mr. Pitter urges me to find that not only is paragraph 3 not engaged, but nor is paragraph 4. Mr. Pitter argues that the knife which you carried was not one which was taken to the scene in the technical sense intended to be conveyed by paragraph 4. I reject this submission. I am sure that you took a knife with you to the building and that you intended when you were there to commit an offence of sexual assault and or have that knife available as a weapon. It's not disputed that you used the weapon in committing the murder of Nikki Allen. Paragraph 4 is therefore engaged. This finding is, however, overtaken by my earlier conclusion that this is a murder of particular seriousness. However, the fact that a knife was taken, even a penknife, and it was used, represents a significant aggravating factor which I must take into account. A further aggravating factor is the vicious and brutal nature of your attack upon Nikki, involving 2 blows at least to the head and over 30 stabs to her body. A further aggravating factor is your attempt to conceal the body by placing her in a distant room in the basement. And finally, your statement to the police. Whilst this was made after George Heron had been charged with Nikki's murder, nonetheless, you are providing a statement in which you gave yourself a false alibi, whilst another person was tried for the murder which you had committed. I must, of course, consider such mitigation as may exist. There is none. Your counsel urges me to take into account your IQ, which falls within the extremely low range, placing you in the bottom 2% of the general population. I accept the content of the report prepared on your behalf by Dr. Harry Wood, a psychologist who describes your mild learning difficulties and a degree of intellectual impairment. However, I am unable to accept that the content of that report in any respect is relevant to the minimum term which I must impose. Any intellectual difficulties which you face do not affect your culpability for this offence. You demonstrated quite sufficient guile to lure Nikki away from the Garths, and you were quick to attempt to cover your tracks by inventing a false alibi which you gave to the police. Nor do I accept that your age, then or now, is a relevant factor mitigating in your favour. At the time of this murder, you were an adult of 25. You were not a child or an adolescent who knew no better. You're now aged 55 years. The fact that as a result of the minimum term which I may impose, you may die in prison, is not, it seems to me, a factor which I should take into account. Therefore, taking all of these factors into account, the minimum term which I would have ordered under Schedule 21 is one of not less than 37 years. I move on to stage 2 of my assessment, which is the Home Secretary's determination. I must now determine what the decision of the Home Secretary would have been before 2002 by applying the applicable guidance at the time. On the 10th of February of 1997, a letter was sent by Lord Bingham to all judges who made recommendations as to the appropriate term in murder cases. That letter advocated 14 years as the normal penalty for the average or normal or unexceptional murder before taking aggravating and mitigating factors into account. The letter went on to list the various factors which would likely call for a sentence mitigating the normal penalty. Those factors included subnormality or mental abnormality, and spontaneity or lack of premeditation beyond that necessary to constitute the offence, for example, a sudden response to family pressure or to prolonged stress. Lord Bingham listed the following factors as likely to call for a sentence more severe than the norm. They included the killing of a child or a very old or otherwise vulnerable victim, evidence of sadism, gratuitous violence or sexual maltreatment, humiliation or degradation before the killing, and the use of firearms or other dangerous weapons, whether carried for defensive or offensive reasons. Lord Bingham remarked that, whilst a recommendation of a punitive term longer than, say, 30 years will be very rare indeed, I don't think one should set any upper limit. Some crimes will certainly call for terms very well in excess of the norm. It's clear from the text of the Bingham letter that Lord Bingham was not himself setting the tariff. Rather, he was reflecting his own judicial experience and that of other judges in describing the level of minimum terms which were being imposed at the time of writing. A practice direction issued in 2004 said that in sentences where the murder was committed before the 31st of May 2002, the best guide to what would have been the practice of the Secretary of State is the letter sent to judges by Lord Bingham of Cornhill, the Lord Chief Justice, in February of 1997. I mention a further practice direction which was issued in 2002 by Lord Wolfe, Although of narrow date application, that practice direction refined the starting points for the minimum terms to be imposed. The range extended from a reduced starting point of 8 to 9 years for a case with reduced responsibility, a starting point of 12 years for a normal murder, for example, one involving a case involving the death of an adult victim arising from a quarrel or loss of temper between two people known to each other, a higher starting point of 15 to 16 years for more serious cases, for especially grave cases, for example, those involving what was described as a sexual murder or the murder of a young child, a term of 20 years or upwards would be appropriate. A term of 30 years existed for an extremely serious case. The practice direction stated that a substantial upward adjustment may be appropriate in the most serious cases, for example, those involving a substantial number of murders, or if there are several factors identified as attracting the higher starting point present. In suitable cases, the result might even be a minimum term of 30 years. And the categorisation maintained the possibility of no minimum term being imposed for cases of exceptional gravity, in effect the imposition of a whole life term. These recommendations were considered by the Court of Appeal in the 2004 case of the Crown and Sullivan, where the court found there to be no inconsistency between Lord Bingham's advice and the Wolf practice direction. At paragraph 34, the court stated that while a judge might be helped to be consistent by the more specific guidance contained in the 2002 directions, their general effect is the same. Both give the judge a considerable degree of discretion. What I take from all of those materials is this. What was described to be a normal or unexceptional murder might attract a starting point for the minimum term in the region of 14 years. For the murder of a child or a murder associated with sexual conduct, a starting point of 20 years might be appropriate. A term of 30 years would be reserved for an extremely serious case, and the imposition of such a minimum term would be a rare event. In cases of exceptional gravity, a whole life term may be imposed. And finally, in all cases in which a minimum term was to be imposed, the court retained considerable discretion to take account of aggravating or mitigating factors which relate to either the offence or the offender in the particular case. It's in this context that I must stand back and examine your offending and determine where, within the range of starting points, the court would have placed that offending and what the effect of the many aggravating factors would have been. Both counsel agree that this is a case in which before December 2002, a minimum term of at least 20 years would have been appropriate. Mr. Wright submits that there would have been and should have been then a significant increase to reflect the multiple aggravating factors. Mr. Pitter that there should be little or no increase from 20 years at all. I'm entirely satisfied that before December 2002, a minimum term well in excess of 20 years would have been imposed. Lord Bingham identified the killing of a child, evidence of sexual maltreatment before the killing, and the use of a weapon, all as separate aggravating factors. All three were present in your case. Even from a starting point of 14 years, these factors would have increased the term substantially, in my judgment, to a point at or beyond 20 years. The court would then have to reflect upon the further aggravating factors which I've described elsewhere. There were, in reality, no mitigating factors. Although Mr. Pitter again relies upon your youth at the time of the offence, I reject that submission. You were 25 years old. The possibility that you may have died in prison or emerged an old man would not have arisen in 1992, even if, as Mr. Pitter submits, I must take the position as it is today. I'm still unable to accept that the possibility that you may die in prison is a factor which in any material way serves to reduce the minimum term. The murder of Nikki Allen involved the cynical manipulation of a young 7-year-old girl who you lured away from her home at night for the purpose of sexually assaulting her. You attacked her twice, once outside the old Exchange building, and then the fatal assault. The fatal assault was brutal. You must have inflicted upon her unimaginable terror in the period before that fatal assault. You then took steps to cover your tracks by hiding the body to the extent that you could within that building, and by advancing your false alibi whilst another person stood trial for the murder which you had committed. I consider, having regard to all of those factors, that your offending was so serious that a minimum term of no less than 29 years would have been imposed. Any term less than this would not have reflected the recommendation of the trial judge or the decision of the Home Secretary at the time. I've given serious consideration to the conclusion that the combination of aggravating factors would have led to the imposition of a term of 30 years or more. However, taking into consideration the observations of Lord Bingham that the imposition of such a term would be very rare indeed, I've concluded that I can't be sure that a term in excess of 30 years would have been imposed. Accordingly, I'm satisfied and find that the minimum term of imprisonment which would have been ordered that you serve before release on licence is 29 years. That being lower than the minimum term I have determined under the contemporary regime, I set the minimum term as one of 29 years, subject to the consideration of the time you have spent on remand, which is 366 days. I remind all of those listening that the minimum term is just that, a minimum term which cannot be reduced in any way. After those 29 years have been served, there is no guarantee that you would be released. It's only if the parole board decides that you are fit to be released that you will be released, and even then you will be subject to licence and recall if you breach the terms of your licence. David Boyd, stand up. For the murder of Nikki Allen on the 7th of October of 1992, the sentence of the court is one of life imprisonment. You will serve a term of 29 years, subject to the 366 days which you have spent on remand before consideration is given to your release by the parole board. If you take him down.
So there we have the sentencing from Mrs. Justice Lambert, quite exhaustive, very upsetting, of course, but she was explaining why she's had to go through all those sentencing considerations, because the case, of course, dates back to 1992. The sentencing then has to be addressed as to the case before 2002. So we have sex offender David Boyd, who's now 55, being sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 29 years. Mrs. Justice Lambert saying that the fact that he would maybe die in prison was not her consideration. No mitigating circumstances, she said, to remind you that Nikki Allen, who was 7 years old, was murdered by Boyd. He hit her with a brick across the head twice, fracturing her skull, and then stabbed her 37 times. The judge saying that the little girl had been taken by him to a cold, dark area in a building for sexual assault. And indications, of course, that Nikki's mother, Sharon Henderson, had told the court she'd fought ceaselessly to see justice done for Nikki. Boyd had remained at large while an innocent man, George Heron, stood trial for the murder and then was acquitted back in 1993. So he's now been taken down, David Boyd, to start serving a 29-year minimum sentence. More reaction on that to come. Stay with us here on GB News. Patrick Christis is next.
Yes, thank you, Mark. It's Patrick Christie's here on GB News. I will be with you for the next 3 hours, but here is what's on the menu in the next 60 minutes. I'm going to be talking about this. A workman has finally snapped at Just Stop Oil. There's some, I think, quite hard-hitting video footage of this, but believe it or not, it was that ordinary man on his way to work, desperate to get there, who was the one that was detained by police.